Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Emma Blackwood. I'm 32 years old. This happened in August 2024, and I still wake up screaming most nights. I used to believe the wilderness was a sanctuary, pristine, pure, governed by natural laws that made sense. I was a wildlife photographer with an Instagram following in the low six figures, specializing in North American predators. Bears were my favorite subjects. Their power and primal nature captured through my lens told stories that resonated with people. That's what brought me to the Tongass National Forest in southeast Alaska, the promise of photographing black bears at Annan Creek during salmon season. I convinced my boyfriend Marcus, my best friend Lila, and Marcus's college buddy Jake to join me on a week-long expedition. We planned to hike deep into the forest, beyond the usual tourist spots, camping in areas where few people ventured. Marcus had always been supportive of my work but approached the wilderness with analytical caution, checking and double-checking our supplies, studying maps and weather patterns. Lila, who I'd known since college, brought her spiritual perspective to everything. She wore crystals around her neck and practiced meditation each morning. Jake was the wild card, a former college athlete who'd never quite grown out of his fraternity days, always looking for the next adrenaline rush. "You're overthinking this," Jake told Marcus at the outfitter's shop in Wrangell as my boyfriend meticulously examined a topographical map. "It's just camping. We've all done it before." "Not in Alaska," Marcus replied, not looking up. "The conditions here can change rapidly. Being prepared isn't overthinking. It's common sense." I was at the counter, chatting with the shop owner, an older Tlingit man named Ray who'd lived in the area his entire life. He nodded approvingly at Marcus. "Your friend's got the right idea," Ray said to me, keeping his voice low. "Tongass doesn't forgive carelessness." "We'll be careful," I assured him. "I've done my research." Ray's weathered face crinkled as he frowned. "Research doesn't mean much when you're out there. Listen." He hesitated, glancing around as if worried about being overheard despite the empty shop. "If you're heading toward Annan Creek, stay on the marked trails. Don't go north of the Bear Observatory, especially not near the old cedars in Devil's Pass." "Why's that?" I asked, intrigued rather than concerned. "Local legends," he said dismissively, but I could tell by the tightness around his eyes that there was more to it. "Just stick to the trails." I should have pressed him for details. Maybe if I had, we would have chosen a different location. But instead, I nodded politely and finished paying for our supplies. Later that night at our motel in Wrangell, I mentioned Ray's warning to the others. "Devil's Pass?" Lila's eyes widened. She'd been arranging her crystals on the windowsill of our shared room. "That sounds ominous." "It's just a name," Jake said, sprawled on one of the beds, scrolling through his phone. "Like Devil's Tower in Wyoming. Locals love to scare tourists with their ghost stories." "I don't know." Marcus was still studying the map. "I'm not superstitious, but locals usually know what they're talking about when it comes to safety concerns." "Maybe there are unstable slopes or aggressive wildlife in that area," I suggested. "Or maybe," Jake sat up with a mischievous grin, "there's a witch who lures hikers to their doom." "Don't joke about that stuff," Lila said sharply. Jake rolled his eyes. "Come on, Lila, you can't possibly believe—" "I don't know what I believe," she cut him off, "but I respect other cultures' warnings and spiritual boundaries." "Let's just stick to our original plan," I said, wanting to avoid an argument. "We'll follow the trail to Annan Creek, set up base camp, and explore from there. No need to go looking for Devil's Pass." We all agreed, and conversation shifted to more practical matters. Who would carry what? How to distribute the weight? When to start in the morning? But Ray's warning lingered in the back of my mind, a small disturbance like a pebble in my hiking boot. The next morning dawned misty and cool. The float plane dropped us off at a small lake about 5 miles from Annan Creek. As we adjusted our packs and checked our bearings, the plane disappeared into the fog, the sound of its engine fading until we were surrounded by nothing but the dripping of condensation from hemlock branches and the occasional call of an unseen bird. The first day's hike was strenuous but uneventful. The Tongass National Forest is the largest national forest in the United States, a temperate rainforest stretching across the Alaskan Panhandle. It's a place of towering Sitka spruce and western hemlock, thick moss carpeting everything, and undergrowth so dense in places that you can lose sight of someone walking just 10 feet ahead of you. The constant moisture creates an atmosphere that feels almost primeval, like you've stepped back into a time before humans ever walked these lands. We reached Annan Creek by mid-afternoon. The salmon were running, their silver bodies flashing in the shallow water as they fought their way upstream. We set up camp in a cleared area about half a mile from the creek, well within regulations but far enough from the bear observatory that we'd have some privacy. "This is perfect," I said, surveying our campsite as Marcus and Jake secured the tent stakes. Lila was arranging small stones in a circle around our perimeter. A protection ritual, she'd explained, though Jake had snickered at the idea. "I'm going to scout the creek for tomorrow's shoot," I added, grabbing my camera. "Anyone want to join?" "I'll come," Marcus offered. "Just let me finish here." "I need to finish my circle," Lila said. Jake waved us off. "I'll get the food cache set up. Don't want any midnight bear visitors." Marcus and I spent about an hour at the creek. I took test shots, noting the best angles and light conditions for the next day. We saw 2 black bears fishing, keeping a respectful and safe distance. It was exactly what I'd come for, and I felt a rush of anticipation for the photographs I'd capture. As we headed back to camp, Marcus suddenly stopped, grabbing my arm. "Listen," he whispered. I held my breath. At first, I heard nothing but the ambient sounds of the forest. Then, faintly, a whisper that seemed to be coming from all directions at once, words in a language I didn't recognize. "What is that?" I murmured. Marcus shook his head. "Probably just the wind in the trees." But there was no wind that afternoon. The air was still, heavy with moisture. The sound faded, and we continued walking, though Marcus kept glancing over his shoulder. When we reached camp, everything seemed normal. Jake had hung our food cache from a tall spruce, and Lila had finished her stone circle and was boiling water for our freeze-dried dinners. "See any bears?" Jake asked. "2, I confirmed. "Good size. They'll make great subjects." That night around the campfire, Jake suggested telling ghost stories, a camping tradition he insisted. Lila refused to participate, saying it would attract negative energy. Instead, she shared what she knew about Tlingit mythology, explaining how the indigenous people of the region believed the forest was inhabited by spiritual beings that demanded respect. "The most dangerous spirit is the Kushtaka," she said, her face serious in the flickering firelight. "They're shapeshifters who can appear as humans or animals, usually otters. They're known to lure people into the wilderness, where they steal their souls." "That's cheerful," Jake remarked dryly. "I'm not saying I believe it literally," Lila clarified, "but these stories developed for a reason, usually to keep people safe from real dangers." "Like getting lost in the woods," Marcus suggested. "Or hypothermia," I added, "if you follow an animal too far from camp." "Exactly," Lila nodded. Although, she hesitated. "What?" I prompted. "The guy at the outfitter's shop. You said he specifically warned against going north of here, to a place called Devil's Pass?" I nodded. "I looked it up before we left. Devil's Pass isn't on any official maps, but it's mentioned in some local forums. There's supposedly an area with very old cedar trees that the Tlingit consider sacred or taboo. Some people call it Grandmother's Territory." "Grandmother who?" Jake asked, suddenly interested. "I don't know, the posts were vague, but there have been disappearances in that area over the years." "There are disappearances in every wilderness area," Marcus pointed out. "People get lost, have accidents. Encounter predators. Of course, Lila agreed. I'm just saying, maybe we should respect the local warning and stick to our plan. We all agreed and turned in for the night. The tent was spacious enough for the four of us with a divider that created 2 compartments. Lila and I took one side, Marcus and Jake the other. Despite my exhaustion from the day's hike, sleep didn't come easily. Every sound from the forest seemed amplified. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small animal in the undergrowth, the creaking of branches. And beneath it all, so faint I might have imagined it, that whispering again. I awoke to Lila shaking my shoulder. "Em," she whispered urgently, "something's wrong." I blinked groggily, noticing the blue-gray light of early dawn filtering through the tent fabric. "What is it?" "Look." She pointed to her backpack in the corner of the tent. It was open, its contents strewn about. I sat up, instantly alert. Did an animal get in? But even as I said it, I knew that was impossible. The tent was zipped shut with no tiers or openings. "No," Lila said, voice trembling. "And that's not all. My protection stones, the ones I placed around the camp, they're gone." "Maybe Jake moved them," I suggested, though I couldn't imagine why he would. "And this?" She held up a small leather pouch that contained her favorite crystals. The pouch was empty. "They're all gone, Emma. All of them." I crawled out of my sleeping bag and woke Marcus and Jake. Jake was irritable at being roused early but became more alert when we explained the situation. "Someone's messing with us," he concluded after examining the tent. "Has to be." "Who?" Marcus challenged. "We're miles from nowhere." "Other hikers? Locals?" Jake suggested. "We haven't seen anyone else since the plane dropped us off," I reminded him. "Well, it wasn't a ghost," Jake said firmly. "Someone got into the tent while we were sleeping, went through Lila's stuff, and took her rocks. Simple explanation." "How did they get in and out without waking any of us?" Lila demanded. "And why would anyone steal worthless stones?" "Worthless to you, maybe," Jake muttered. "Let's all calm down," Marcus said, always the mediator. "We'll check the campsite, see if there are any footprints or other signs someone was here. Maybe there's a simple explanation we're missing." But our search yielded nothing. No footprints, no disturbance to the surrounding vegetation. Nothing to suggest anyone or anything had approached our tent during the night. The only strange detail was that all of Lila's carefully placed boundary stones were indeed missing, without a trace. "I'm not comfortable staying here," Lila announced after our fruitless search. "Something feels wrong." "We can't leave now," I protested. "I haven't even started shooting yet." I'd been planning this trip for months, saving for it, promoting it to my followers. I couldn't go back empty-handed. "We don't have to leave," Marcus suggested diplomatically, "but maybe we should relocate our camp, find a spot closer to the observatory where other hikers might be around." Jake shook his head. "This is ridiculous. So someone played a prank. So what? We're not running away because Lila lost her magic rocks." "They weren't magic," Lila said through gritted teeth. "They were symbolic. And if someone took them, why? Who even knew they were there?" The argument went in circles until I finally suggested a compromise. We'd stay one more night in our current location. If nothing else happened, we'd continue with our original plan. If there were more disturbances, we'd relocate closer to the observatory. Neither Lila nor Jake was entirely satisfied, but they agreed. I spent the day photographing the bears at Annan Creek. The experience was everything I'd hoped for. Magnificent animals in their natural habitat, the interplay of light through the trees, the drama of the salmon run. For a few hours I forgot about the strange occurrences of the previous night. When I returned to camp late in the afternoon, I found Jake alone, feeding small sticks into the fire. "Where are the others?" I asked, setting down my equipment. "Marcus went to filter more water," Jake replied without looking up. "Lila's gathering berries or flowers or something. She's still freaked out." I sat across from him. "You don't think anything weird is going on?" He shrugged. Weird stuff happens in the woods. Animals moving things, people's imaginations running wild. Nothing supernatural about it. I guess. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't want to fuel more tension. I'm going to find Lila. It'll be dark soon. I found her about 100 yards from camp, carefully selecting salmon berries from a dense patch. Hey, I called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, looking relieved to see me. Oh, good. I didn't want to be out here alone, but we needed something fresh to go with dinner. As she spoke, I noticed something over her shoulder, a dark figure standing between two distant trees. I squinted, trying to make out details. It looked like a person, too tall and upright to be a bear, but something about the proportions seemed wrong. Em? Lila had noticed my distraction. What is it? She began to turn, but I grabbed her arm. Don't, I whispered, though I couldn't have explained why. Let's go back to camp. What did you see? She asked as I pulled her away from the berry patch. I'm not sure. Probably nothing. A shadow. But Lila knew me too well to accept that. When we were safely back at camp, she cornered me while Jake was occupied with building up the fire. Tell me what you saw, she insisted. I described the figure, trying to articulate what had unnerved me about it. It was just wrong, somehow. Like a person, but not a person. Lila's face paled. Like a person wearing a person, she murmured. What do you mean? Skinwalkers, she said quietly. In some Native American traditions, they're witches who can transform by wearing the skins of animals or people. You think that's what I saw? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. I don't know, she admitted, but I do know we shouldn't be here. This place feels wrong, Emma. Can't you sense it? I was about to respond when Marcus returned with the water containers. He looked troubled. Everything okay? I asked. He hesitated, setting down the water. Probably nothing, but I could swear someone was watching me at the creek. I kept seeing movement from the corner of my eye, but whenever I turned, there was nothing there. A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the fire. Jake thinks we're overreacting, I said quietly. Jake isn't exactly known for his perceptiveness, Marcus replied. We decided not to discuss our concerns in front of Jake, not wanting to provoke another argument. Instead, we prepared dinner and tried to maintain normal conversation, though an undercurrent of tension remained. As darkness fell, the forest around us seemed to press closer. The usual night sounds, insects, the occasional owl, rustling leaves, were present, but underneath them ran that persistent whispering, just at the edge of hearing. I couldn't tell if the others heard it too. No one mentioned it. We were cleaning up after dinner when Jake announced he was going to gather more firewood before it got too dark. Don't go far, Marcus warned. Stay within shouting distance. Jake rolled his eyes but nodded before disappearing into the trees. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Marcus began pacing around the fire. He should be back by now, he said, checking his watch for the third time in as many minutes. Maybe he's having trouble finding dry wood, I suggested, but my stomach was nodding with apprehension. At the 40-minute mark, Marcus grabbed his headlamp. I'm going to look for him. We shouldn't separate more, Lila protested. If something's happened, that's exactly why I need to go, Marcus cut her off. If he's hurt, we'll all go, I decided, grabbing my own headlamp. Together. We called Jake's name as we ventured into the darkening forest, our headlamp beams cutting through the gloom. There was no response. The whispering seemed louder now, more insistent, though I still couldn't make out any words. We'd gone perhaps 200 yards from camp when Lila suddenly stopped. Listen, she hissed. We fell silent. At first, I heard nothing unusual. Then, a soft crunching of underbrush, approaching from ahead of us. Jake? Marcus called, directing his light toward the sound. A figure emerged from between the trees, and we all exhaled in relief. It was Jake, but as he came closer, something seemed off. He was smiling, A wide, fixed grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice slightly flatter than normal. "Lost track of time." "We were worried," Marcus admonished. "I told you to stay close." Jake's smile didn't waver. "Found some great wood," he said, though his arms were empty. "Back at camp." The four of us returned to the fire. Sure enough, there was a neat pile of firewood that hadn't been there when we left. I frowned, trying to work out the timeline. How had Jake collected the wood, returned to camp, and then ended up ahead of us in the forest? I caught Lila watching Jake with undisguised suspicion. He moved differently, stiffer, with oddly timed gestures as if he was operating his body by remote control. When Marcus asked where exactly he'd gone, Jake's answer was vague, his gaze constantly drifting to the dark trees north of our camp. That night in the tent, Lila whispered to me, "That's not Jake." I shivered, wanting to dismiss her words but unable to shake the feeling that she was right. Something had changed in him. I thought about what she'd said earlier, like a person wearing a person. "What do we do?" I whispered back. "We leave, first thing tomorrow." I nodded, my project suddenly seeming insignificant compared to the growing sense of dread that filled me whenever I looked at Jake's too wide smile. We drifted into uneasy sleep. I dreamed of running through endless trees, pursued by something I couldn't see but could hear, that same whisper, growing louder, resolving into words I almost understood. I jolted awake to screaming. Disoriented, I scrambled upright, fumbling for my headlamp. The sound was coming from outside the tent. "Marcus!" I recognized his voice, twisted with pain and terror. "Stay here," I told Lila, who was awake and white-faced beside me. I glanced at the other side of the tent, empty. Both Jake and Marcus were gone. "No," Lila grabbed my arm. "We stay together." We pulled on shoes and jackets with shaking hands and unzipped the tent. The night air hit us, cold and damp. The fire had died to embers, casting only the faintest glow. Marcus's screams had stopped, leaving an awful silence. "Marcus!" I called, my voice sounding thin and frightened. "Jake!" No response. I swept my headlamp across the campsite, seeing nothing unusual until the beam reached the edge of the clearing. There, just at the tree line, something dark gleamed wetly on the ground. Lila saw it too. She clutched my arm so tightly it hurt. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't go over there." But I had to know. I approached slowly, Lila reluctantly following. As we got closer, the headlamp revealed what the darkness had hidden. A dark pool spreading across the forest floor. Its source a crumpled form half hidden by ferns. "No," I breathed, breaking into a run. "No, no, no." It was Marcus. He lay face down, his back a ruined mess of torn flesh and exposed bone, as if something with enormous strength had ripped him open from behind. Blood still pulsed weakly from the wounds, telling me he'd been alive just moments ago. I fell to my knees beside him, knowing it was too late but unable to accept it. Lila stood frozen a few feet away, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Where's Jake?" she managed finally, her voice high with hysteria. As if in answer, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond our light. We both whirled, directing our headlamps toward the sound. Jake stood there, watching us. But it wasn't Jake, not really. His body was the same, but his posture was all wrong, bent at unnatural angles. His face was stretched into that terrible smile. Too wide for a human face, his eyes now flat black pools reflecting nothing. Blood, Marcus's blood, covered his hands and spattered his clothes. "Run," Lila breathed beside me. The thing wearing Jake's skin tilted its head, the movement jerky and inhuman. When it spoke, the voice was Jake's but layered underneath with something else. That whispering sound, now clear enough to make out words. "Grandmother is hungry," it said, the smile stretching impossibly wider. "Grandmother wants to wear your skin now." Lila grabbed my arm and pulled. Survival instinct finally overcame shock, and I ran. We plunged into the forest, away from camp, away from the thing that had been Jake, away from Marcus's body. I heard pursuit behind us. Not running, but a strange, loping gait, branches cracking under irregular steps. "Which way?" I gasped as we ran. "Creek," Lila panted. "Observatory. People." We oriented ourselves as best we could in the dark, heading what we hoped was east toward Annan Creek and the Bear Observatory where other hikers might be found. The forest seemed to close around us, branches reaching like fingers to snag our clothing, roots rising from nowhere to trip our feet. And all around, that whispering voice, sometimes sounding like it came from right beside us, sometimes from far away. "Grandmother is waiting. Grandmother is hungry." Time lost meaning. We might have been running for minutes or hours. The forest looked the same in every direction, and more than once I feared we were moving in circles. Our headlamps began to flicker and fade, the batteries draining far faster than they should have. "It's messing with time," Lila gasped during a brief pause to catch our breath. "With the electronics, with perception." "What is it?" I demanded. "What is grandmother?" "I think," Lila began, but cut off as a crashing sound came from behind us. We ran again, blind panic driving us forward. The ground suddenly dropped away beneath my feet. I tumbled down a steep slope, rocks and branches tearing at my skin. When I finally came to a stop, pain radiated from my ankle and Lila was nowhere to be seen. "Lila," I called softly, terrified of being heard by the wrong ears but equally afraid of being alone. No answer. I tried to stand, but my ankle gave way beneath me. Sprained, possibly broken. I crawled to the base of a massive tree and huddled there, trying to control my breathing, straining to hear any sound of pursuit. My headlamp flickered and died completely, leaving me in darkness broken only by faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in a small clearing dominated by enormous cedar trees, far larger and older than any I'd seen in the forest so far. Nailed to the trunks were small objects that gleamed dully in the moonlight: bones, feathers, small animal skulls, and I realized with growing horror what looked like human teeth. I'd stumbled into Devil's Pass, grandmother's territory. Time seemed to stretch and compress. The moon moved too quickly across the sky, shadows lengthening and shortening at impossible speeds. The whispering was constant now, coming from everywhere at once. I don't know how long I sat there, cradled in the roots of the ancient cedar, watching the accelerated dance of moonlight and shadow. My mind kept returning to Marcus, to his ruined body, to the thing wearing Jake's skin. I thought of Lila, hoping she was still running, that she'd reach safety. The whispers suddenly stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise had been. I held my breath, every muscle tense. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. Into the clearing stepped Lila. Relief flooded me, so intense I nearly cried out. But something stopped me, some instinct for self-preservation that screamed a warning. I watched as she moved into the center of the clearing, her movements smooth and purposeful, nothing like the panicked flight we'd shared earlier. "Emma," she called, her voice perfectly normal. "Emma, where are you? It's safe now. Jake's gone." I remained silent, pressed against the tree. "Emma, please," she continued, turning slowly in place. "I've found help. Marcus is alive." The lie confirmed my fears. Whatever stood in the clearing wasn't Lila, or wasn't only Lila. "I know you're here," the thing said, Lila's voice suddenly dropping an octave, taking on that layered quality I'd heard from Jake. "Grandmother can smell your fear." I needed to move, to run, despite my injured ankle, but terror held me frozen. The Lila thing continued its slow rotation until it faced my hiding place directly. A smile spread across her face, that same too-wide grin that had transformed Jake's features. "There you are," it said, taking a step toward me. Desperate, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy branch that had fallen beside me, and struggled to my feet, using the tree for support. "Stay back," I warned, brandishing the branch. It laughed, the sound like rotten wood cracking. "Grandmother has waited so long," it said. "The others were just vessels. You are the one she wants." "What are you?" I demanded, voice shaking. "What do you want?" "So many names," it said, continuing its slow approach. "Kushtaka, Skinwalker, the Anan hag, Grandmother Whisper." Another step closer. "I am hunger. I am patient. I have worn many skins." I swung the branch as it came within range, connecting solidly with its shoulder. It didn't flinch, didn't even seem to notice the blow. "Your friend fought too," it said conversationally. "The vessel called Jake. He fought inside his own skin as Grandmother made him open the other one. Made such pretty sounds as he screamed inside, watching his own hands work." Bile rose in my throat. I swung again, this time aiming for its head. The branch connected with a sickening crack and the thing wearing Lila's skin staggered. I didn't wait to see if I'd done any real damage. I ran, or tried to, a hobbling, limping flight through the ancient cedars away from the clearing. Behind me, I heard an inhuman screech of rage that rose to a pitch no human throat could produce. Dawn was breaking, the forest gradually becoming visible in gray half-light. I had no idea where I was or which direction would lead to safety. My ankle sent spikes of agony up my leg with every step, but fear drove me forward. I burst through a thick stand of undergrowth and found myself on the banks of a creek. Not a Nan Creek, judging by the size, but perhaps a tributary. Water. Civilization followed water. I turned downstream and limped along the bank as quickly as I could manage. The forest grew quieter as full daylight arrived. Normal sounds returned. Birds calling, the rush of the creek, the wind in the trees. No whispers, no footsteps in pursuit. Had the creature abandoned the chase, or was it simply waiting for darkness to fall again? Hours passed. The creek widened, eventually joining what I believed was Anan Creek. My progress was painfully slow due to my injured ankle, but I pushed on, driven by the primal need to escape. Sometime in the afternoon, I heard voices, human voices, calling out conversationally to one another. I nearly wept with relief. Ignoring the pain, I climbed the bank toward the sound and found myself staggering onto the trail leading to the Annan Wildlife Observatory. A middle-aged couple out day hiking from Rangil stared in shock at my appearance. Clothes torn and bloodied, face scratched, limping heavily. "Bear attack," I gasped, the simplest explanation. "My friends, dead." They helped me to the observatory where a ranger called for emergency evacuation. I was airlifted to Wrangell Medical Center, treated for a sprained ankle, dehydration, and exposure. The rangers organized a search party for my companions. They found our camp undisturbed, tent still standing, gear in place, no sign of violence. No bodies, no blood, no evidence of Marcus's brutal death or our panicked flight through the forest. Just 3 empty sleeping bags and one occupied by what appeared to be a peacefully sleeping Jake. Except it wasn't Jake. The body matched his description, his clothing, carried his ID. But the autopsy revealed certain inconsistencies. Older, healed fractures Jake had never sustained, dental work that didn't match his records, subtle anatomical differences that made no sense. As for Lila and Marcus, they were officially listed as missing persons. The search was eventually scaled back and then abandoned. Sometimes I wonder if they're truly gone or if something still wears their skins, walking among unsuspecting people, hiding its true nature behind familiar smiles. I told my story to the authorities, of course. They attributed it to trauma, to the confusion that often accompanies survival situations. The medical report suggested I'd experienced hallucinations brought on by fear and exhaustion. No one believed in Grandmother Whisper. I've never returned to Alaska. I no longer photograph wildlife or venture into remote areas. The wilderness I once loved now fills me with paralyzing terror. I live in a small apartment in Chicago, as far from forests as I can manage, and I never go anywhere alone. But sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I hear it, that whispering voice, patient and hungry, and I know with bone-deep certainty that grandmother is still waiting, that one day she'll wear a face I trust to find me again, because the most terrifying truth is this: I don't think I fully escaped. In the moments before I broke free of the ancient cedar grove, the thing wearing Lila's skin touched me, just the lightest brush of fingers against my arm. Sometimes I catch my reflection moving a fraction too slowly in mirrors, or find myself saying words I didn't consciously choose. And sometimes, when I'm very tired or not paying attention, I feel my lips stretching into a smile that's just a little too wide. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 34 years old. This happened in September 2024, and I still can't sleep through the night without seeing James's face. What became of James's face? Grinning at me through the darkness. I wasn't always the paranoid wreck you see before you. 13 months ago, I was a senior software developer at a tech company in Seattle, living in a downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and all the modern conveniences. I had everything society told me I should want, yet I felt hollow. The endless meetings, the political jockeying, the artificial light and recycled air, it was slowly killing me. So I did what any rational person would do. I quit. I sold most of my possessions, put the essentials in storage, and decided to reconnect with the natural world. James thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. He'd been my best friend since our freshman year at University of Washington. And while we'd taken different paths, me into tech, him into financial consulting, we'd remained close. James was always the risk-taker between us, the one who pushed boundaries. I was the planner, the cautious one. Ironic, considering how our story ends. It was James who suggested the Alaska trip. He called it an intervention. "You need to get the full wilderness experience before you commit to this mountain man fantasy," he said over beers at our favorite Seattle pub, 1 week in real backcountry. "If you still want to live in a cabin in the woods after that, I'll help you build the damn thing myself." I agreed because it seemed reasonable. Test the waters before diving in. What I didn't know was that James had invited his new girlfriend, Mia Chen, a wildlife photographer he'd been dating for about 6 months. I'd only met her twice before, but she seemed competent and level-headed. More importantly, she had extensive backcountry experience, having photographed wildlife in remote locations around the world. "Wrangell St. Elias is perfect," she told us during our planning session at James's apartment. She spread out maps across his kitchen table, her dark hair falling over her face as she traced potential routes with her finger. "It's the largest national park in America, 13 million acres of virtually untouched wilderness. Late September means fewer tourists, but before the real winter sets in, we'll have the place to ourselves." Her enthusiasm was infectious. Even I, the reluctant one, found myself excited about exploring one of the most remote places in North America. We spent weeks planning our route, gathering supplies, and preparing for contingencies. Mia insisted we all take a wilderness first aid course. James complained but complied. I threw myself into the preparations, researching everything from bear safety to wilderness navigation techniques. None of it prepared us for what waited in those mountains. We flew into Anchorage, rented a 4-wheel drive, and made the long drive to the park entrance near Copper Center. The visitor center was mostly empty this late in the season. The ranger who checked our backcountry permits, a weathered Alaskan named Dave with a salt and pepper beard, raised his eyebrows when he saw our itinerary. "Kuskalana Basin this time of year. Weather can turn fast up there," he warned, tapping our planned route. "Make sure you check in with us when you get back. If we don't hear from you by your exit date, we'll send someone looking." "We're prepared," Mia assured him confidently. "I've hiked in worse conditions." Dave's eyes lingered on her, then on James and me. "Just remember, it's not just the weather you need to worry about out there." At the time, I thought he was referring to the wildlife. the grizzlies and moose that could pose threats to hikers. If only it had been something so mundane. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. We hiked through sprawling valleys filled with crimson tundra and gold-leafed aspens. Massive glaciers spilled between mountain peaks like frozen rivers. The air was crisp and clean, the silence profound. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, my body tired from honest physical exertion rather than mental stress. Even James, who'd spent most of his adult life in climate-controlled offices and upscale restaurants, seemed to be enjoying himself. "I get it now," he told me on the second night as we sat around our campfire, the northern lights shimmering green and violet above us. "This beats the hell out of quarterly reports." Mia smiled, snapping photos of the aurora with her camera. "Wait until you see the Tusculana Basin. It's supposed to be otherworldly." The trouble started on day 3. We awoke to a light dusting of snow and temperatures that had dropped overnight. Nothing alarming. We'd packed for cold weather, but as we hiked toward higher elevation, I noticed our GPS was acting strangely. The coordinates would jump erratically, sometimes placing us miles from our actual location. Mia pulled out her backup compass, but it, too, seemed unreliable, the needle spinning in lazy circles before settling in directions that couldn't possibly be north. "Weird magnetic anomalies in this area," Mia suggested, frowning at her equipment. "The mountains are rich in iron ore." James laughed it off. "Good thing we have an actual map. Old school wins again." But even the map seemed wrong somehow. Landmarks didn't quite match up with what was marked on the paper. Distances felt off. A ridge that should have taken us an hour to reach remained elusive after 3 hours of hiking. "We're fine," James insisted when I voiced my concerns. "So, we're a little off course. That's part of the adventure, right?" I wasn't so sure. There was something about these woods that felt unwelcoming. I caught myself looking over my shoulder repeatedly, unable to shake the sensation of being watched. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, just the sound of our boots crunching through fallen leaves and patches of snow. By late afternoon, we came across a small cabin tucked against the base of a cliff. It wasn't marked on our maps, and it clearly wasn't part of the official Park Service structures. The logs were darkened with age, the small windows clouded with dirt. A thin spiral of smoke rose from a crooked chimney. "Hello," James called out, his voice startling in the stillness. "Anybody home?" The door creaked open, and a man emerged. He was tall and rail-thin, with a wild gray beard and eyes so pale they were almost colorless. He wore flannel and canvas pants that might once have been blue, but had faded to the same grayish-brown as the surrounding forest. His name was Harold Blackwood, and he was the first sign that something was deeply wrong in these woods. "You folks are a long way from the usual trails," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He didn't invite us inside, but stood in his doorway, one hand hidden behind the frame in a way that made me suspect he was holding a gun. "We're headed to Tusculana Basin," Mia explained, showing him our map. "I think we might have gotten a bit turned around." Harold's pale eyes narrowed. "Tusculana? In September?" He spat on the ground. "Ain't nothing good up there this time of year. The hunger wakes up when the days get short." "The hunger?" I asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. Harold studied us, seeming to make some internal calculation before responding. "The hunger that walks. The Wendigo." He said the word like it was poisonous. "Old stories say it was once a man who ate human flesh during a terrible winter. Let the hunger turn him into something else. The Atna people avoided these valleys for generations. Now it's all a national park, and nobody remembers why some places should be left alone." James snorted beside me. "Right, man-eating monsters. Is this where you offer to let us stay in your totally not creepy cabin for the night?" Harold's expression didn't change. "My cabin ain't for guests, and you'd be wise to turn back the way you came." He nodded toward the darkening sky. "Storms moving in, fast and hard. If you're smart, you'll make camp at the base of this ridge and head back to civilization at first light." He was right about the storm. Within an hour of leaving Harold's cabin, the snow began falling in earnest. We quickly set up our tent in a small clearing surrounded by twisted spruce trees. The wind howled through the branches, creating an eerie, almost vocal sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Inside the tent, we huddled around Mia's small camp stove, warming freeze-dried stew and trying to ignore the worsening conditions outside. "So, the local crazy gave us the full Blair Witch treatment," James joked, but I could tell the encounter had unsettled him too. "What the hell is a Wendigo anyway?" "Wendigo," Mia corrected, her expression serious. "It's an Algonquian legend, a malevolent spirit associated with winter, famine, and cannibalism. The details vary by tribe, but generally it's said to possess humans, giving them an insatiable hunger for human flesh." "Charming," I muttered. Just what I wanted to think about while trapped in a tent during a blizzard. "It's just stories," Mia said, but she glanced uneasily at the tent walls, now bowing inward from the force of the wind. "Indigenous people created these legends as warnings. Don't venture into certain areas during winter. Don't resort to cannibalism no matter how desperate you get. Practical survival advice wrapped in supernatural clothing." James reached over to squeeze her shoulder. "Always the rationalist. That's why I love you." He kissed her cheek and she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We tried to sleep after that, but it wasn't easy. The storm grew more intense, snow piling up around our tent, the wind screaming like something in pain. I dozed fitfully, waking every few minutes to the creaking of tree branches and the rustling of something, you outside the tent. Around 3 a.m., I woke to find James gone, his sleeping bag empty beside me. Mia was still asleep, curled toward the tent wall. I whispered James's name, thinking perhaps he'd gone outside to relieve himself, but received no answer. I pulled on my boots and coat and unzipped the tent as quietly as possible. The storm had died down, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that reflected the moonlight with an almost unnatural brightness. The air was bitterly cold, burning my lungs with each breath. "James?" I called softly, not wanting to wake Mia if it wasn't necessary. No response. I fumbled for my headlamp and switched it on, the beam cutting through the darkness between the trees. That's when I saw the tracks, a single set leading away from our tent and into the forest. They weren't normal footprints. They were elongated, too deep in the snow, with something odd about the spacing and shape that I couldn't immediately identify. I followed them, driven by concern for my friend, but increasingly uneasy about what I might find. The tracks led through the twisted trees, sometimes disappearing where the snow hadn't penetrated the canopy, then reappearing. After about 10 minutes of walking, I came to a small clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. In the center of the clearing stood a crude structure made of branches, like a lean-to but arranged in a way that made no practical sense. Hanging from the branches were small animal carcasses, squirrels, a fox, some unidentifiable smaller creatures, all skinned, their flesh glistening wetly in the moonlight. The snow beneath was stained dark. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. This wasn't something a bear or wolf would do. This was deliberate, human, or something pretending to be human. I turned to run back to camp and collided with James. "Jesus," I gasped, nearly falling over. "Where the hell have you been? I was worried sick." Something was wrong with his face. In the pale moonlight, his features seemed somehow elongated, his smile too wide, his eyes sunken and gleaming with an unfamiliar light. There was something dark smeared around his mouth and down the front of his jacket. "Sorry, man," he said, his voice slightly off-pitch. "Nature called. Then I thought I saw something moving in the trees. Went to check it out." He wiped at his mouth with the back of his hand. "We should get back to camp. It's cold." I glanced over my shoulder at the grotesque shrine, then back at James. Did you see that?" He looked past me, his expression blank for a moment before he shook his head. "See what? It's just woods, Ethan." that too wide smile again. "Come on, let's go." I let him lead the way back, staying a few paces behind him. His gait was wrong. Longer strides, slightly jerky like he was still getting used to his own legs. When we reached the tent, he crawled in without another word and was instantly asleep, or pretending to be. I sat outside for a long time, watching the trees and listening to the unnatural silence of the forest. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I returned to my sleeping bag, though I kept my knife close at hand. Morning brought gray skies and a tension I could almost taste. Mia was already outside when I woke, melting snow for coffee. James was still asleep, snoring softly. "Did James say anything to you last night?" I asked her quietly. She looked up sharply. "About what?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. I woke up, and he was gone. When he came back, he was different. Mia's eyes flicked to the tent, then back to me. "Different how?" Before I could answer, the tent unzipped and James emerged, stretching dramatically. "Morning, campers. Coffee ready yet?" In daylight, he looked normal, the same James I'd known for years, except for a small cut on his lower lip and dark smudges under his eyes. He moved with his usual ease, no sign of the strange gait I'd noticed in the night. Had I imagined it all? The stress of the wilderness, the storm, Harold's disturbing Wendigo story, had they combined to make me see things that weren't there? "Sleep well?" Mia asked him, her tone carefully neutral as she handed him a cup of instant coffee. "Like a baby," James replied, then winced as the hot liquid touched his cut lip. "Weird dreams, though. Can't remember exactly what, just images of running through the snow, hunting something." He shrugged. "Probably just processing that crazy hermit's monster stories." We broke camp after breakfast, debating our next move. The storm had dropped at least 8 inches of new snow, making travel more difficult. Our GPS was still malfunctioning, and the sky remained overcast, making it hard to navigate by the sun. "I think we should head back," I said firmly. "The weather's only going to get worse, and we're already off course." James shook his head emphatically. "We came all this way to see Tusculana Basin. We can't turn back now because of a little snow and some tech issues." "It's not just that," I started to say, but James cut me off. "What? You're spooked by some locals' ghost stories?" His voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. I thought the whole point of this trip was to embrace the wilderness experience. Mia stepped between us. "How about a compromise? We head toward higher ground to get our bearings, reassess the situation, and then decide." We agreed, but the mood was strained as we packed up and began hiking. James took the lead, setting a punishing pace that had Mia and me struggling to keep up. He seemed energized, almost manic, stopping occasionally to scan the horizon with an intensity that was uncharacteristic. By early afternoon, we'd reached a ridge overlooking a vast valley. The clouds had partially lifted, revealing glimpses of the landscape below. It was beautiful, but disorienting. Massive glaciers, forests, and alpine meadows spread out in a panorama that didn't quite match our maps. "I think that's the Tusculana River," Mia said, pointing to a silver thread winding through the valley floor. "If we follow it downstream, we should eventually hit the old mining road. That would be an easier way out if we decide to turn back." James ignored her, staring intently at a distant point in the valley. "There's something down there," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "Near that stand of dead trees. Do you see it?" I squinted in the direction he was pointing but saw nothing unusual. "Just trees and snow, man." "No, there's something." He trailed off, then abruptly started downhill. "Come on, we need to check it out." "James, wait," Mia called, but he was already descending rapidly, almost recklessly. We followed, having little choice. The slope was steep and slick with snow, requiring our full attention to navigate safely. When we finally reached the valley floor, James was nowhere in sight. "James!" I shouted, my voice echoing strangely. "Where are you?" Silence, then a distant, "Over here," from a stand of skeletal aspen trees about 100 yards away. We found him standing in front of what appeared to be an abandoned mining structure, a collapsed wooden building with the remnants of old equipment scattered around it. The wood was rotted, the metal rusted beyond recognition. It had clearly been there for decades, perhaps a century. "This isn't on any of our maps," Mia said, frowning as she studied the ruins. James was crouched by what looked like an entrance to a mine shaft, partially caved in but still accessible if one were willing to squeeze through. "We should explore it," he said, his voice eager. "Absolutely not," I replied. "That thing could collapse at any moment." "Don't be such a coward, Ethan," James snapped, the venom in his voice taking me aback. "Always playing it safe. That's why you're running away from your life instead of facing your problems." "James," Mia gasped, "that's completely uncalled for." He stood abruptly, turning to face us with that same too wide smile I'd seen in the night. "I'm just saying what we're all thinking. Poor Ethan, having a midlife crisis at 34. He stepped toward me, and it took everything I had not to back away. "You think camping in the woods makes you brave? You don't know what brave is." I stared at him, this person wearing my best friend's face but speaking with a voice I didn't recognize. "What the hell is wrong with you? This isn't like you at all." Something flickered behind his eyes, uncertainty perhaps, or a momentary return of the real James. Then it was gone. "Nothing's wrong with me. I've just never felt more alive." He turned back to the mine shaft. "I'm going in, with or without you." Mia caught his arm. "No, you're not. It's not safe, and we need to make camp before dark." For a moment, I thought he might strike her. His body tensed, and something feral crossed his features. Then he relaxed, the strange energy dissipating. "Fine," he said flatly. "Where do you want to camp?" We found a relatively sheltered spot about half a mile from the mine, setting up our tent in uneasy silence. As Mia prepared dinner, I pulled her aside, out of James's earshot. "Something's wrong with him," I whispered urgently. "Last night when he disappeared, I found him by some kind of shrine made of dead animals. There was blood on his face." Mia's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "I'm not hallucinating, if that's what you're asking. And it's getting worse. The way he's acting, the things he's saying, that's not James." She bit her lip, glancing over at James, who was gathering firewood at the edge of our clearing. "I've noticed it too. His hands. Have you seen his hands? The fingers look longer somehow. And last night I woke up and he was just standing outside the tent, completely still, staring into the forest. For hours. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. We need to get back to civilization. Tomorrow. Whatever's happening, we need help." "Agreed," Mia said quietly. "But don't confront him about it. If he's not himself, but we don't know how he'll react." We rejoined James at the campfire, trying to act normal despite the tension crackling between us. He ate ravenously, finishing his freeze-dried meal in seconds and eyeing ours with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Not hungry?" he asked when I set my half-finished meal aside, my appetite gone. "Just tired," I lied. "Think I'll turn in early." Inside the tent, I pretended to sleep, listening to Mia and James talking quietly by the fire. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of their conversation. Mia's voice gentle but firm, James's responses becoming increasingly agitated. Eventually, they too came to bed, lying on either side of me in our small tent. I must have actually fallen asleep at some point because I woke suddenly to the sound of movement. James was gone again. Mia was awake beside me, her eyes wide with fear in the dim light. "He said he heard something outside," she whispered. "That was 20 minutes ago." I sat up, reaching for my headlamp. "I'm going to look for him." Mia grabbed my arm. "Not alone. We stay together from now on." We dressed quickly and exited the tent. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in a black sky. The silence was absolute. No wind. No animal sounds, not even the creak of branches. "James," Mia called, her voice shockingly loud in the stillness. No response. We moved cautiously through the trees, following a fresh set of those same elongated footprints I'd seen the night before. They led back toward the abandoned mine. "I don't like this," I muttered, but we pressed on, our headlamps casting dancing shadows as we moved. The mine entrance loomed before us, a black hole in the hillside. The footprints led directly to it and disappeared inside. "No way," I said, shaking my head. "We are not going in there." "We have to find him," Mia insisted, though her voice trembled slightly. "Mia, think about this. Whatever's happening to James, it started after that first night in the storm, after Harold warned us about the Wendigo." She scoffed, but it sounded forced. "You can't seriously believe—" "I don't know what to believe, but I know that's not James anymore. Not entirely. And I'm not going into a collapsing mine shaft to find whatever he's becoming." A low laugh echoed from inside the mine, sending ice through my veins. "Ethan? Mia? Is that you?" James's voice, but wrong, distorted, with an undertone that sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison. "Come see what I found. It's amazing." Mia took a step forward, but I grabbed her wrist. "Don't. We can't just leave him," she said, tears in her eyes. "That's not him anymore," I insisted. "We need to go back to camp, grab what we can, and get the hell out of here. We can bring back help." For a long moment, I thought she would refuse. Then she nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but we hurry." We backed away from the mine entrance, then turned and ran through the snow, our breath coming in panicked clouds. Back at camp, we stuffed only the essentials into our packs. Water, some food, first aid kit, fire starters, extra layers. "Which way?" Mia asked as we stood at the edge of our clearing, ready to flee. I pointed toward the east, where the terrain seemed to slope downward. "If we can reach the river Mia spotted, we can follow it to the mining road." We'd made it perhaps half a mile when we heard it, a howl that was neither wolf nor human, but something horrifyingly in between. It echoed across the valley, setting my heart pounding. "Run!" I gasped, and we did, crashing through underbrush and stumbling over hidden rocks beneath the snow. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by the crack and snap of branches behind us. Whatever was following moved faster than any human could, especially in these conditions. Mia suddenly pitched forward with a cry of pain, her foot caught in a hidden animal burrow. I skidded to a halt, rushing back to help her. "My ankle," she gasped. "I think it's broken." I looked over my shoulder. Nothing visible yet, but the sounds of pursuit were growing louder. "Can you stand?" She tried and nearly collapsed again, her face white with pain. "Go," she said through gritted teeth. "Get help." "I'm not leaving you." I shrugged off my pack and pulled out the emergency flare gun we'd brought for signaling in case of extreme emergencies. "Can you use this if it gets close?" She nodded, taking the flare gun with trembling hands. I scooped her up, surprised at how light she felt, and continued our desperate flight through the forest. But I was already tiring, my lungs burning from the frigid air, my legs leaden from the effort of running through snow while carrying Mia. We reached a small clearing, and I had to stop, gently setting Mia down against a fallen log. I fumbled in my pack for my hunting knife, a pathetic defense against whatever was coming, but better than nothing. The forest had gone completely silent again. No sounds of pursuit. Nothing at all. "Maybe we lost it," Mia whispered hopefully. I didn't believe that for a second, but I nodded, not wanting to frighten her further. I scanned the tree line, knife gripped tightly in my freezing hand. The attack, when it came, was from above. A shape dropped from the branches overhead, landing with impossible lightness despite its size. In the beam of my headlamp, I caught glimpses of what had once been James, his face grotesquely elongated into something approaching a snout, his limbs too long and jointed wrong, fingers extended into claw-like appendages. But it was his eyes that haunted me most, Still recognizably James's blue eyes, filled with awareness and hunger in equal measure. "Ethan," it said in that wrong voice, the one that seemed to contain multitudes, "you don't need to run. I want to share this with you." It gestured to its transformed body. The hunger brings strength, power, freedom from human limitations. "James," I said, my voice breaking, "if you're still in there somewhere, fight this. Come back to us." The thing that had been James cocked its head, an eerily human gesture from something increasingly inhuman. "James is here. He's me. We're becoming something greater together." It took a step forward, and I raised my knife. "Stay back." "You can't hurt me with that," it said, almost kindly. "Nothing can hurt me now. The hunger protects me." "James, please," Mia begged from behind me. "This isn't you." The creature's attention shifted to her, nostrils flaring. "Mia, beautiful Mia, you'll be part of this too. We'll hunt together when you change." It lunged then, faster than I could track, but not toward me, toward Mia. I threw myself between them, slashing wildly with my knife. I felt the blade connect, hot liquid splattering my face. The creature, James, hissed in pain, recoiling. "Run!" Mia screamed at me. I turned to see her aiming the flare gun directly at the Wendigo. "No," I started to say, but she'd already pulled the trigger. The flare shot out with a loud hiss, striking the creature squarely in the chest. Its clothing caught fire immediately, flames spreading rapidly across its body. The scream it unleashed was unlike anything I'd ever heard, part human agony, part bestial rage, and underneath it all, I could hear James, my friend James, crying out my name in desperation and confusion. The burning Wendigo thrashed wildly, charging into the trees with supernatural speed despite being engulfed in flames. The sounds of its passage faded into the distance, leaving us alone in the clearing, shaking with fear and adrenaline. "We have to move," I said, helping Mia to her feet. "It might come back." She leaned heavily on me, her face drawn with pain. "Did you see?" "That was still James, wasn't it? Some part of him?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. We struggled through the night, moving as quickly as Mia's injury would allow. As dawn broke, we finally reached the river we'd spotted from the ridge. It was wider than it had appeared from a distance, its waters dark and swift beneath a thin layer of ice around the edges. "We need to follow it downstream," Mia said, her voice weak from pain and exhaustion. "The old mining road should intersect it eventually." But our ordeal wasn't over. By midday, Mia's condition had worsened. Her ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, and she'd developed a fever. We made camp by the riverside, and I did what I could with our first aid supplies, which wasn't much. "I think it's infected," she murmured, her eyes glassy with fever. "The old man, Harold, his cabin can't be more than a day's hike from here. He might have antibiotics." "I'm not leaving you," I said firmly. "You have to." She gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I can't walk, and you can't carry me all the way back. Make me a shelter, leave me most of the supplies, and go get help. It's our only chance." She was right, and we both knew it. I spent the remaining daylight building her a makeshift shelter from fallen branches and our emergency blanket, gathered enough firewood to last the night, and left her with most of our food and water. "I'll be back with help as soon as I can," I promised, my throat tight. "Keep the fire going. It'll help keep things away." She nodded weakly. "Be careful, Ethan. And if you see James, remember that's not him anymore, no matter what it says or does." I kissed her forehead and set off along the riverbank, moving as quickly as I dared on the uneven, snowy terrain. By nightfall, I'd made good progress, the landscape becoming more familiar as I retraced our original route. I made a cold camp that night, not daring to light a fire that might attract attention. Sleep was impossible. Every sound, the crack of settling ice on the river, the distant call of an owl, sent my heart racing. I sat with my back against a tree, knife in hand, watching the darkness. Dawn found me already moving, stiff and exhausted but driven by the urgency of Mia's condition. By mid-morning, I spotted a thin column of smoke rising above the trees, Harold's cabin. I approached cautiously, remembering his unfriendly reception. The cabin door stood open. Inside, furniture was overturned, possessions scattered. Blood stained the rough wooden floor. Of Harold himself, there was no sign. I searched the wreckage, finding a first aid kit and, miraculously, a battery-powered emergency radio. I tried several frequencies, finally reaching a park ranger station. I explained our situation, leaving out the Wendigo and focusing on Mia's injury, and they promised to send a rescue helicopter to the coordinates I provided. As I gathered supplies to take back to Mia, I noticed something in the corner of Harold's cabin that made my blood freeze. A worn leather journal lay open on a small desk, its pages filled with frantic handwriting. I shouldn't have stopped to read it, but something compelled me. The journal documented Harold's decade in the wilderness and his encounters with what he called the Wendigo. He described watching his own hunting partner transform after they'd been stranded by an early blizzard, forced to resort to desperate measures to survive. The entries grew increasingly paranoid, detailing signs of infection in his own body, elongated fingers, enhanced senses, unnatural hunger. The final entry was dated just 3 days earlier. "It's here. The hunger is here. James Wilson." The man said his name was James Wilson when he stopped by my cabin with his friends. I recognized the look in his eyes. The hunger had already touched him. I should have killed him then. Now it's too late. It's hunting me. It remembers me. The woman will be next. Then the other man. Then it will spread. It always spreads. I dropped the journal, my hands shaking. Harold had known James's name, a name I was certain we hadn't shared with him during our brief encounter, and he'd written this before the transformation had even fully begun. I grabbed the journal, stuffed it in my pack along with the medical supplies, and fled the cabin. The trip back to Mia's makeshift shelter took hours, my progress slowed by caution and growing dread. The forest felt different now, watchful, alive with malevolent awareness. When I finally reached the riverside clearing, Mia's shelter was empty. "Mia!" I called, panic rising in my throat. "Mia, where are you?" The fire had gone out, the ashes cold. Her backpack remained, but there was no sign of her. Then I saw the tracks in the mud by the riverbank, those same elongated footprints I'd come to recognize, alongside smaller, normal human prints. Signs of a struggle, and blood. Not much, but enough to tell me Mia had been injured beyond her already damaged ankle. I followed the tracks downstream, moving as quietly as I could while still maintaining speed. They led to a small tributary cutting into the larger river, then up a game trail into the dense forest. The sun was setting when I heard the sounds, a wet, tearing noise, followed by what could have been mistaken for weeping if it hadn't been so utterly devoid of humanity. I crept forward, using the trees as cover until I could see into a small hollow. Mia was there, propped against a fallen log, alive but barely conscious. Her leg was a mess of blood and torn fabric, and her face was pale as death. And crouched over her, back turned to me, was the thing that had been James. The fire had burned away most of its clothing and much of its hair, leaving charred skin that should have been fatal to any human. But this creature was healing before my eyes, new tissue forming over the burns, pale and glistening in the fading light. Its body had continued to transform. Longer limbs, protruding spine, fingers now unmistakably clawed. It was speaking to Mia in that terrible voice, the one that contained echoes of James but was primarily something ancient and malevolent. "The pain passes quickly," it was saying almost tenderly. "The hunger replaces everything. You'll see. We'll hunt together. The three of us." "Ethan won't join you," Mia said weakly, her voice barely audible. "He's stronger than you think." "Everyone joins, eventually," the creature said. "In times of desperation, Everyone makes the same choice. Harold did. James did. You will." I could see what it was doing now. It had torn open its own wrist and was pressing the wound against Mia's injured leg, letting black blood mingle with hers, infecting her. I had seconds to act. The rescue helicopter wouldn't arrive in time, and even if it did, what would happen if we brought this contagion back to civilization? I thought of James, my friend, who pushed me to take risks, who'd been by my side through college and breakups and career changes. The James who existed beneath this monstrous shell. And I thought of Mia, who would soon begin the same horrific transformation if I didn't intervene. I leveled the flare gun I'd reloaded at the cabin and fired. The Wendigo sensed it coming, spinning with that unnatural speed, but not quickly enough. The flare struck it directly in the face, igniting instantly. The creature's scream was both James's and something far older, a sound of rage and agony that echoed across the valley. It clawed at its burning face, then charged directly at me, moving through the underbrush like a nightmare given flesh. I had a fraction of a second to decide, run or stand my ground. I chose to stand. As it reached me, I ducked under its wild swing and drove Harold's hunting knife deep into its chest, aiming for where I thought the heart would be. The Wendigo staggered, looking down at the knife with something like surprise in its ruined face. Then those blue eyes, still unmistakably James's, met mine. "Ethan," it said, and for an instant I heard only my friend's voice, confused and frightened. "What's happening to me?" Then the moment passed, and the inhuman rage returned. It grabbed me by the throat, lifting me off the ground with one clawed hand. I kicked uselessly, spots dancing in my vision as it squeezed. A gunshot cracked through the air. The Wendigo jerked, its grip loosening. Another shot, and it dropped me, stumbling backward. Mia had dragged herself across the clearing. She held Harold's revolver, something I'd missed in my hasty search of the cabin. Her hands were steady despite her condition as she fired a third shot, catching the Wendigo in the head. It fell, its body convulsing. Black blood pooled beneath it, sizzling where it touched the snow. For several minutes, we watched in horrified fascination as it thrashed, the movements gradually becoming weaker. Then, in the dying light, the Wendigo began to change again, its limbs shortening, its features becoming more human. The burns and gunshot wounds remained, but the creature lying before us was recognizably James again. "Ethan," he gasped, blood bubbling from his lips. "Mia, I'm so sorry. I couldn't stop it. I tried." I crawled to his side, taking his hand. Human again, the elongated fingers and claws gone. "It's okay, James. It wasn't your fault." He shook his head weakly. I let it in. I was so hungry that first night. Found something in the woods. Something that had died. I was so cold, so hungry. His body spasmed with pain. "Don't let them take my body back. Burn me. Promise you'll burn me completely." "I promise," I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. James's eyes focused on something beyond us, his expression shifting from pain to wonder. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Then he was gone. I kept my promise. Using the last of our emergency fuel and whatever dry wood I could find, I built a pyre and cremated my best friend's body. Mia and I watched in silence as the flames consumed him, sending sparks spiraling up into the night sky. The rescue helicopter arrived shortly before dawn, guided by the smoke from James's pyre. We told them he'd fallen into a ravine, that we'd been unable to recover his body. They focused on Mia's condition, which had deteriorated dangerously despite my amateur medical care. During the flight out, as the medics worked to stabilize Mia, she gripped my hand with alarming strength. "I can feel it," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "In my blood. He infected me, Ethan." "We'll fix it," I promised, though I had no idea how. "We'll find a way." But I already knew there might not be a way. The wound on her leg was healing too quickly, the edges knitting together before my eyes. Her fingers felt longer against my palm. the nails harder, and when she smiled at me gratefully, her teeth seemed just a little too sharp. They took her to the hospital in Anchorage, where the doctors were baffled by her condition. The infection in her leg defied identification, but they pumped her full of broad-spectrum antibiotics anyway. Her fever spiked to levels that should have been fatal, then miraculously broke on the third day. I stayed by her side throughout, sleeping in a chair by her hospital bed, Harold's journal hidden in my bag. I read it cover to cover, searching for answers, for a cure, for anything that might help. The journal suggested that the transformation could sometimes be slowed or temporarily reversed by extreme heat, explaining why the fire had forced the Wendigo back into James's human form at the end. But there was no mention of anyone ever being cured once the infection had taken hold. Still, Mia seemed to be improving. The doctors were amazed by her recovery speed. They spoke of miraculous healing abilities and suggested her case might be worthy of medical journal publication. Only I noticed the subtle changes. The way she pushed away the hospital food, claiming lack of appetite while her eyes tracked the movements of the staff with predatory intensity. The way her fingers stretched just a bit longer each day. The nightmares that left her thrashing and whimpering about the hunger. On the 7th night, I woke to find her standing by the window of her hospital room, staring out at the mountains visible in the distance. "I need to go back," she said without turning. "It's calling me." I approached her cautiously. "Mia, that's the infection talking. We need to fight it." When she turned to face me, her eyes reflected the dim light like an animal's. "Fight it?" She laughed, a sound that raised the hairs on my neck. "Why would I want to fight it? Do you know how strong I'm becoming? How clearly I can see everything now?" She stepped toward me, moving with a fluid grace that was beautiful and terrifying. "You could come with me, Ethan. We could be together. James was right. The hunger brings gifts." I backed away, fumbling in my bag for the flare gun I'd kept, just in case. "This isn't you, Mia. This is the Wendigo." She smiled, her teeth definitely sharper now. "There is no difference anymore. I am becoming, and it's glorious." She held out her hand, the fingers visibly elongated. "Join me. Voluntarily. It's easier that way." "I can't," I whispered, my back against the door. Something like sadness crossed her face. "Then this is goodbye. They'll never catch me, you know. And by next winter there will be more of us. The hunger always spreads." She moved faster than my eye could track, shattering the window and disappearing into the night. By the time security responded to the alarms, there was nothing to see but broken glass and a few drops of black blood on the sill. I tried to explain what had happened, showed them Harold's journal, told them about the Wendigo, begged them to believe me. They sedated me, diagnosed me with PTSD, and kept me under observation for 2 weeks. When they finally released me, the first snow of winter was falling over Anchorage. I stood outside the hospital, watching the white flakes spiral down from a gray sky, and wondered how many people would disappear into the Alaskan wilderness this season. How many would make desperate choices when faced with starvation? How many would invite the hunger in? I flew back to Seattle the next day, but I couldn't stay. The city felt cramped, artificial, filled with soft people who had no concept of what waited in the true wilderness. I kept seeing James's face in crowds, that final human expression of wonder as he died. I kept hearing Mia's voice in my dreams, inviting me to join her. I've moved to a small town in northern Montana now, close enough to civilization to maintain connections, far enough into the mountains to serve as a watch post. I've been studying Harold's journal, comparing his observations with indigenous legends, scientific papers on parasitic infections, anything that might help me understand what we encountered and how to fight it. Sometimes, on winter nights when the wind howls down from the north, I think I hear her calling me. Mia, or what used to be Mia, hunting in the snowy forests, spreading the hunger. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, when food tastes like ash and human connections feel hollow, I wonder what it would be like to answer that call. to embrace the hunger, to become something ancient and powerful and free from human limitations. But then I remember James's final words, his plea for forgiveness, and I know I will spend the rest of my life fighting this infection, this ancient evil that waits in the wilderness for those desperate or foolish enough to invite it in, because the hunger always spreads, and someone needs to remember how to stop it. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 34 years old. This happened in September 2024, and I still can't sleep through the night without seeing James's face, what became of James's face, grinning at me through the darkness. If you're reading this, stay away from Wrangell St. Elias when the days grow short. The hunger is waiting there, and it remembers us. My name is Ethan Reynolds. This happened in August 2024. I still don't sleep much anymore. When I do, my dreams are filled with whispers from the shadows and the sound of something moving through dense underbrush, always just out of sight. I'm writing this down as a warning, though I doubt anyone will believe me. That's fine. Just stay away from the north ridge of Savage River in Denali. Whatever you do, don't go there, especially when the aurora dances overhead. I was 34 when I organized the expedition, a wildlife photography trip through some of the more remote regions of Denali National Park. It had been 18 months since I lost my wife, Claire, in a car accident. 18 months of grief counseling, antidepressants, and well-meaning friends trying to get me back out there. The trip was supposed to be my return to the world of the living. Ironic, considering what happened. Marcus Bennett had been my best friend since our sophomore year at University of Washington. He'd stood by me through Claire's death and the dark months that followed. When I pitched the idea of a 10-day backcountry hike to capture the late summer wildlife migrations, he was the first to sign on despite having only moderate hiking experience. "You need this, Eth," he told me over beers at our local haunt in Seattle. And honestly, I could use the break too. What I didn't know then was that Marcus had been struggling with an oxycodone addiction for the past year, a souvenir from a skiing accident and subsequent back surgery. He'd been hiding it well, but the isolation of the wilderness would soon strip away his carefully constructed facade. We also brought on Valerie Chen, a naturalist I'd met through a photography forum who had extensive experience in the Alaskan wilderness. At 32, she was accomplished, confident, and knew more about tracking animals than anyone I'd ever met. Her knowledge would be invaluable for finding the elusive wildlife I hoped to photograph. "The migration patterns are shifting this year," she told me during our planning session. "If we head to the highlands near Polychrome Pass, we might catch the caribou herds moving earlier than usual." Jake Thornton was our local guide, a recommendation from the Park Service. In his mid-30s with a thick beard and the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors, Jake seemed perfect, knowledgeable, prepared, and familiar with even the most remote regions of the park. He claimed to have grown up in Healy, just outside the park boundaries. "There are places in Denali that even the rangers don't know about," he said with a hint of pride as we finalized our route. "Hidden valleys, unmarked trails. I can show you spots where you'll get photographs no one has ever taken before." It was exactly what I wanted to hear. I should have questioned why these places remained unphotographed. We flew into Fairbanks on August 12th, spent a night gathering our final supplies, and drove the rented SUV down to the park entrance the next morning. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, temperatures in the high 50s, and a forecast that promised similar conditions for at least the first week. As we checked in with the backcountry office and registered our intended route, I felt genuine excitement for the first time since Claire died. The first 3 days were everything I'd hoped for. We hiked through stunning alpine meadows bursting with late summer wildflowers, spotted several grizzlies at a safe distance, and I captured what might be the best wildlife shots of my career. A wolf pack taking down a caribou on a distant ridge, the drama silhouetted against the setting sun. We camped each night under skies ablaze with stars, and even saw the northern lights on our second evening. Jake proved to be an excellent guide, pointing out animal signs I would have missed and sharing stories about the park's history and geology. Marcus seemed to be enjoying himself too, though I noticed he frequently excused himself from camp, disappearing for 15 or 20 minutes at a time. I assumed he was just taking care of business in private. It was on the fourth day that things began to change. We'd hiked deeper into the park than I'd originally planned, following Jake's suggestion to visit what he called the Valley of Echoes, near the Savage River's northern tributary. "Not many people know about this place," he said, an unsettling glint in his eye. "The valley creates strange acoustics. Sound bounces in ways that, well, you'll see." The valley was beautiful, with steep walls rising on either side of a narrow gorge cut by a crystal-clear stream. The moment we entered, I noticed the unusual silence. Despite the wind visibly moving through the trees above us, down in the valley, no sound reached us except our own footsteps. That evening, as we set up camp in a small clearing, I tried to use my satellite GPS to mark our location. The device blinked, showing our position jumping erratically across the map, sometimes hundreds of miles from where we actually were. "That's weird," I said, showing the glitching screen to Valerie. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" She frowned, taking the device from me. "Interference, maybe. Or possibly the valley walls are messing with the signal." Jake, overhearing our conversation, smiled knowingly. "Technology doesn't always work right in these parts. The old-timers say this land has its own rules." I laughed it off, but a sense of unease had begun to creep into my mind. That night, I dreamed of Claire. She was standing at the edge of our camp, her back to me, her dark hair moving in a wind I couldn't feel. When she turned, her face was wrong. Too pale, her eyes too dark, her smile stretching impossibly wide across her face. "It's watching us, Ethan," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. "It's been watching us since we entered the valley." I woke with a start, my heart hammering against my ribs. The campsite was quiet except for Marcus's soft snoring from his tent. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint red glow over the clearing. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed Jake sitting perfectly still at the edge of camp, staring into the woods. He didn't move, didn't seem to be breathing, just watching. I called out to him softly, not wanting to wake the others, but he didn't respond. After a moment, I got up and approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He turned slowly, his eyes reflecting the dying firelight like an animal's. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" "The whispers. They're talking again tonight." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't hear anything. Maybe it was the wind. Jake smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "There is no wind in the Valley of Echoes, Ethan. Only whispers." I went back to my tent, but couldn't sleep. Jake remained at his post until dawn, never moving, never appearing to tire. When morning came, he acted as if nothing unusual had happened, cheerfully preparing breakfast and discussing our plans for the day. I wanted to bring up his strange behavior, but something held me back. It was Valerie who first noticed the markings on the trees as we broke camp. Crude symbols carved into the bark, angular lines that looked almost like letters, but in no alphabet I recognized. "These are fresh," she said, running her fingers over the cuts. "Made within the last day or so." "Probably other hikers," Marcus suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Jake said nothing, but I caught him staring at the markings with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. As we hiked deeper into the valley that day, more markings appeared on trees and rocks along our path. Sometimes they seemed to be ahead of us, as if marking a trail. Other times they appeared on trees we had already passed, as if someone was following behind. By midday, our unease had grown palpable. Even Marcus, usually quick with a joke to break tension, had fallen silent. The valley seemed to be growing darker despite the clear sky overhead, as if the air itself was thickening, absorbing the light. Our watches began to behave strangely. Mine ran backward for an hour, then stopped altogether. Valerie's kept resetting to midnight while Marcus's raced ahead, the hands spinning wildly around the face before freezing. "This is fucked up," Marcus said, tapping his watch face. "Jake, what the hell is going on in this valley?" Jake turned to us, his expression unreadable. "Time moves differently here. The old stories say this place exists. Between." "Between what?" I asked. "Just between," he replied cryptically. That evening, we made camp earlier than usual beside a small, unnaturally still pond. No one wanted to continue through the valley in the growing darkness. As I set up my tent, I noticed Marcus was sweating profusely despite the cool air. His hands trembled as he tried to secure his tent stakes. "You okay?" I asked quietly, moving to help him. "Fine," he snapped, then immediately softened. "Sorry, man. Just..." I left some medication in the SUV. Didn't think I'd need it out here. I remembered his back problems. "Pain getting bad?" He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I'll manage." After a tense dinner where conversation was minimal, we retired to our tents earlier than usual. The night was eerily quiet. No insects chirping, no rustling of animals in the underbrush, not even the sound of wind in the trees. Just oppressive silence. I dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every imagined sound. Around what I guessed was midnight, my watch had stopped completely by then, I heard movement outside my tent. Rustling, then the sound of a zipper being carefully opened. Peering out, I saw Marcus slipping away from camp, heading into the darkness of the surrounding forest. Concerned, I grabbed my headlamp and followed at a distance. He moved with purpose, as if heading to a specific destination. After several minutes of careful stalking, I saw him stop in a small clearing about 200 yards from our camp. He knelt on the ground, his back to me, hunched over something I couldn't see. I was about to call out when he suddenly went rigid. His head snapped up, and even from where I stood I could see his body begin to tremble violently. Then, slowly, he turned his head. Not his body, just his head, rotating it nearly 180 degrees to look directly at me. In the beam of my headlamp, his face was a mask of terror. His eyes were wide, pleading, his mouth working silently as if trying to form words. Behind him, rising from the darkness of the forest floor, a shadow seemed to detach itself from the greater darkness. It had no definite shape, more like a void in the world, a place where light and matter simply ceased to exist. I stood frozen as the shadow flowed up Marcus's back, over his shoulders, and began to envelop his head. His silent pleading became a gargled scream that cut off abruptly as the darkness covered his face. Then, silence again. My instinct was to run, to flee back to camp and the relative safety of numbers, but I couldn't abandon my friend. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped forward, calling Marcus's name. The figure, Marcus's body, stood smoothly, still facing away from me. When it turned, Marcus's face had changed. His features were the same, but his expression was all wrong. A too wide smile, eyes that reflected my headlamp with an animal-like glow. "Ethan," he said, but the voice wasn't his. It was deeper, resonant, with an accent I couldn't place. "You should be sleeping." "Marcus!" My voice shook. "What's happening?" It tilted Marcus's head at an unnatural angle. Marcus needed something. I provided it. Now, Marcus belongs to the valley. I backed away slowly. "What are you?" The thing wearing Marcus's face smiled wider. "I am old. Older than your national park. Older than your nation. The Athabascans called me Indage, the one who lives in shadows. The white trappers called me Old Wendell. Names are such temporary things." With each word, Marcus's voice faded further, replaced by something ancient and cold. I continued backing away, my heart pounding in my ears. "Don't leave yet," it said. "Soon your friends will join us. The woman has interesting secrets, and the guide, he has served me well, bringing me such perfect offerings." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Jake had led us here deliberately. "Why?" I managed to ask. "Hunger," the thing said simply, "and loneliness. It has been many seasons since I fed properly, since I wore a new skin." With that, Marcus's body lurched forward with impossible speed. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly across the forest floor. Behind me, I heard movement. Not the sound of human feet, but something else. Something that seemed to flow rather than step. I reached camp, gasping for breath, and crashed into Valerie, who was emerging from her tent. "What's happening?" she demanded, gripping my arms. I heard screaming. "We need to leave," I panted. "Now! Where's Jake?" As if summoned by his name, Jake stepped out from the darkness beyond the dying campfire. His posture was relaxed, almost amused. "Going somewhere?" he asked. There was no surprise in his voice, no concern. "You knew," I accused, backing away, pulling Valerie with me. "You brought us here for it." Jake sighed as if disappointed by my reaction. "Every few years, it needs to be fed. Otherwise, it takes whoever it wants, whenever it wants. This way, we control it, we satisfy it. A fair exchange for the protection it provides." "Protection from what?" Valerie asked, her voice steadier than I expected. Jake's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "From itself." From the forest edge, Marcus emerged, but his movements were wrong, jerky, puppet-like, as if his limbs were being controlled by someone unfamiliar with how bodies should move. His head lolled at an unnatural angle, that terrible smile still fixed on his face. "Is this what happened to your family, Jake?" I asked, desperately trying to buy time as I glanced around for a weapon. Any weapon. "Did it take them too?" A flicker of genuine emotion crossed Jake's face. Pain, quickly masked. "My grandfather brought me here when I was 12, showed me the old ways, said our family had been serving as guardians for generations. When my time came, I refused. Tried to leave." His voice hardened. "It took my wife and son instead. Said next time I should choose the offerings more carefully." "You're insane," Valerie whispered. Jake shrugged. "Insanity would be fighting something that cannot be defeated. This is acceptance, adaptation, survival." As he spoke, Marcus's body lurched closer, and I noticed dark stains spreading across his clothing. Not blood, but something else, something like tar or oil that seemed to move with purpose. Valerie saw it too and reacted faster than I could, grabbing a burning branch from the fire and thrusting it toward Marcus. The thing inhabiting him hissed and recoiled, slithering partially out of Marcus's body before pulling back in. For an instant, I saw my friend's true face beneath the darkness. Terrified, in agony, silently screaming for help. Jake moved with surprising speed, tackling Valerie and sending the flaming branch spinning into the darkness. They grappled on the ground as I stood frozen, watching Marcus's possessed form approaching again. Understanding came like a thunderbolt. Fire. The thing feared fire. I lunged for the campfire, grabbing the largest burning log I could manage, ignoring the searing pain as embers scored my palm. I swung it wildly at Marcus, keeping the creature at bay while trying to formulate an escape plan. "The valley entrance is north," I shouted to Valerie, who had managed to gain the upper hand on Jake, slamming a rock against his temple. "We need to get back the way we came." She nodded grimly, rising to her feet as Jake lay stunned. "What about Marcus?" I looked at the thing wearing my friend's body, searching for any sign of the man I knew. There was nothing, just that horrible smile and eyes that reflected the firelight like a predator's. "That's not Marcus anymore," I said, my voice breaking. The possessed body of my friend lunged again, moving with inhuman speed. The burning log caught him across the chest, and to my horror, the thing began to spread up the wood like living oil, extinguishing the flames as it moved. I dropped the log and backed away. "Run!" I shouted to Valerie. "Head north! Don't stop!" She hesitated only a moment before grabbing her pack and sprinting into the darkness. I should have followed immediately, but I couldn't leave without trying once more to reach my friend. "Marcus," I pleaded, backing away as his possessed form advanced. "If you're still in there, fight it." For the briefest moment, the monstrous smile faltered. Marcus's eyes, his real eyes, met mine, filled with pain and terror. His mouth moved, forming words with great effort. "Kill me," he gasped, his voice briefly his own. "Eth, kill me." Then the darkness flowed over his face again, and whatever had broken through was gone. The thing resumed its advance, moving more cautiously now, circling me like a predator assessing its prey. From the ground, Jake groaned and began to stir. I was out of time. In desperation, I grabbed the entire burning skeleton of our campfire, ignoring the pain as embers seared my hands and arms. With a primal scream, I charged the thing wearing Marcus's body, driving the blazing wood directly into its chest. The creature shrieked, a sound no human throat could produce as flames caught on Marcus's clothing. The black substance oozed from every pore, trying to escape the fire, but it was too late. Fire spread rapidly across Marcus's possessed form, and the shrieks became a cacophony of inhuman voices overlaid with one all-too-human scream of agony. I whispered, "I'm sorry," as I ran north into the darkness, the image of my burning friend seared into my mind forever. I caught up to Valerie about half a mile away. She was waiting behind a massive, fallen tree, a makeshift torch in one hand, a large hunting knife in the other. "Marcus?" she asked as I approached. I shook my head, unable to speak. Behind us, the ungodly shrieking continued, echoing strangely in the valley. Then came a sound like thunder, though the sky was clear and star-filled. The ground beneath our feet trembled. "We need to move," Valerie said. "Now." We ran through the night, following creek beds and game trails, always heading north toward where we believed the valley entrance lay. The forest around us seemed alive, branches reaching like grasping hands, roots rising to trip our feet. More than once I heard whispers just behind me, speaking words in a language no human mouth was meant to form. Dawn was breaking when we finally saw it, the narrow passage between two towering rock faces that marked the entrance to the Valley of Echoes. We'd been running for hours, exhaustion making every step an act of will. But the sight gave us renewed energy. 50 yards from freedom, Jake stepped out from behind a boulder, blocking our path. His face was bloodied from Valerie's attack, his expression murderous. "You burned it," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Damaged its preferred vessel. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Saved my friend from an eternity of torment," I replied, raising the pathetic remains of my torch, little more than a smoldering stick by now. Jake laughed, a hollow sound. "Saved him? You've doomed us all. The bargain is broken. It will take whoever it wants now. It will spread beyond the valley." "Then we'll tell people," Valerie said. "Warn them. Get the authorities involved." "Nobody will believe you," Jake sneered. "And by the time they do, it will be too late." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the valley exit. "Go. Run to your comfortable world. Tell your stories. Be labeled as trauma victims, or attention seekers, or lunatics. Meanwhile, it will feed. It will grow stronger. And one day, when you least expect it, you'll look into the eyes of someone you love and see it looking back at you." As he spoke, I noticed movement behind him, a darkness gathering, flowing across the ground like living shadow. Jake didn't seem to notice, too focused on his tirade. "Jake," I said quietly, nodding toward the approaching darkness. He turned, his expression changing from anger to understanding to resignation in the span of a heartbeat. "Ah," he said softly, "the bargain is truly broken then." The darkness surged forward, enveloping Jake's legs and rapidly climbing his body. Unlike with Marcus, there was no struggle, no resistance. Jake simply closed his eyes, a peaceful expression settling over his features as the shadow consumed him. "Run," I told Valerie, pushing her toward the valley exit. "Don't look back." We sprinted the final distance, the sound of something large moving through the underbrush close behind us. As we passed through the narrow opening between the rock faces, I felt a pressure change, like stepping from a pressurized cabin into open air. Behind us, the pursuing sounds abruptly ceased. We didn't stop running until we reached a Park Service trail 3 hours later. A ranger found us, exhausted, dehydrated, burned, and babbling about shadows and possession. They assumed we were suffering from exposure and trauma after losing our companions to a backcountry accident. The search and rescue operation found the remains of our camp, and eventually they recovered what was left of Marcus, a body charred beyond recognition. Jake was never found, despite an extensive search.
The official report listed Marcus's death as an unfortunate campfire accident after he fell into the ring that night. Jake was presumed lost, disoriented, his body taken by predators. Case closed. Valerie
and I tried to tell the authorities.
But, as Jake predicted, no one believed us. Eventually, we stopped trying. I still have nightmares. In them, I'm back in that moonlit clearing, watching the shadow flow over Marcus's body. But in the dreams, I don't run. I stand my ground, and the shadow flows up my own limbs, cool and somehow comforting. It whispers promises of power and vengeance as it seeps into my pores. I wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, checking my skin for signs of the black substance, examining my eyes in the mirror to make sure they're still my own. Valerie moved to New Zealand 6 months after we escaped. Last I heard, she was working at a wildlife sanctuary, as far from forests and shadows as she could manage. We don't speak anymore. Some bonds are formed in trauma, but ultimately they only serve as reminders of what we endured. I tell myself, the creature, Old Wendell, Indaga, the Skinwalker, whatever name you prefer, is confined to its valley, that the barrier we felt as we escaped is real and permanent, that it can't follow us into the outside world. But sometimes, catching my reflection in a darkened window, I see something move behind my eyes, something old and patient and hungry. And I wonder if a part of it came with me after all, a seed planted in the darkness of my mind, growing stronger with each passing day. If you go to Denali, stick to the marked trails. If you hear about a hidden valley near the Savage River where sound behaves strangely, walk the other way. And if you meet a guide named Jake Thornton, who promises to show you places no one else knows about, run, and don't look back. My name is Daniel Harmon. I'm 34 years old. This happened in September 2023, during what was supposed to be a week-long hiking trip with my girlfriend, Elise. I've replayed those days in my mind so many times that the memories feel worn at the edges, like an old photograph handled too often. The doctors say writing it down might help with the nightmares, but I'm not convinced anything will ever erase what happened in those mountains. Still, I'll try. It began as a celebration. Elise had just finished her doctoral program in environmental science, and I'd suggested we take some time away from the city, reconnect with nature and each other after years of her being buried in research. She'd been distant lately, sometimes staring off into nothing when she thought I wasn't looking, but I attributed it to exhaustion. Academia can hollow you out. We chose the Arrogech Peaks region in Gates of the Arctic National Park, remote, pristine, and challenging enough to make the journey worthwhile. Elise had done fieldwork there years before and spoke of the granite spires with such reverence that I knew it had to be our destination. No cell service, no crowds, just us and the wilderness. "It'll be perfect," she said, her hazel eyes finally showing some spark again. "September is ideal. The mosquitoes are gone, the tourists have cleared out, and the northern lights might make an appearance." I believed her. I'd always believed her. The first sign that something was wrong came during our bush plane ride from Bettles. The pilot, a weathered Alaskan named Ray with skin like tanned leather, kept glancing back at Elise with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You folks sure about the Arrogech?" he asked over the engine noise. Been strange reports from that area lately. Few hunters came back early, talking nonsense." "What kind of nonsense?" I asked. He shrugged. "The kind that comes from too many nights alone in the wild or too much whiskey around the campfire. Strange sounds. Lights where there shouldn't be any. One fella claimed his compass spun in circles." Elise laughed it off. "The magnetite content in some of these rock formations can mess with compasses, and sound carries weirdly in mountain valleys." Ray nodded, but he didn't look convinced. "Just stick to your planned route and check in with the ranger station when you get back. 10 days and we'll come pick you up at the same spot, weather permitting." As we neared our destination, I pressed my face against the window. The landscape below was vast and indifferent. Endless forests giving way to tundra and finally the jagged teeth of the Brooks Range. So beautiful it made my chest ache. So empty it made something primal in my brain whisper caution. "That's Circle Lake." Elise pointed to a perfectly round body of water nestled between mountains. "That's where we'll make our first camp." Ray dropped us at a gravel bar beside a winding river. As the plane disappeared into the clouds, I felt the true weight of our isolation settle over me. The only sounds were the rush of water and the whisper of wind through the dwarf birches. Elise stood beside me, her face tipped up to the mountains, breathing deeply. "God, I've missed this place," she whispered, and for a moment she looked utterly at peace. We hiked for 4 hours that first day, making good time despite our heavy packs. The trail was more of a suggestion than a path, marked occasionally by cairns left by previous hikers. Elise moved with surprising confidence for someone who hadn't been here in years. Circle Lake appeared just as the evening light turned golden. It was even more perfect than it had looked from the air. Crystal clear water reflecting the towering peaks that surrounded it on 3 sides like sentinels. "It's incredible," I said as we set up our tent on a flat spot about 50 yards from the shore. "The Nunavut people believe this lake was created by something falling from the sky," Elise said, hammering in a tent stake. "They avoid it, especially at night." I laughed. "Well, good thing we're not superstitious." She didn't laugh back, just looked across the water with that faraway expression that had become so familiar over the past months. That night, exhausted from travel and hiking, we crawled into our sleeping bags early. I fell asleep, watching aurora flickers dance green and purple at the edges of the sky. I woke some hours later to find Elise's sleeping bag empty. "Elise," I whispered, then louder, "Elise." The tent was silent. I unzipped the flap and peered out. The night was clear and cold, stars spilling across the sky in reckless abundance. And there by the lake's edge stood Elise, completely naked, up to her ankles in water that had to be near freezing. "Elise," I called, scrambling out of the tent. "What are you doing? You'll get hypothermia." She didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear me. As I approached, I could see her lips moving rapidly, forming words I couldn't make out. Her eyes were open but vacant, fixed on the center of the lake where the moonlight pooled like mercury. I touched her shoulder and she startled violently, turning to me with confusion. "Dan, what? Why am I—" She looked down at herself, then at the water lapping at her ankles, and I saw real fear flicker across her face. "You were sleepwalking, I think," I said, shrugging out of my jacket to wrap around her shoulders. Her skin was ice cold. "Come on, let's get you back to the tent." She was shivering uncontrollably by the time I got her dressed and into her sleeping bag. I held her close, trying to warm her with my body heat. "I haven't sleepwalked since I was a child," she murmured. "Not since before my parents died." "It was probably just the stress of finishing your degree catching up with you," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Your brain's finally decompressing." "Maybe," she said, but we both knew that wasn't it. In the morning, Elise had no memory of her nighttime excursion. She seemed more like herself than she had in months, laughing, pointing out interesting plants and geological features as we continued our hike deeper into the Arrogach Valley. I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole incident. Our second day took us through stands of stunted spruce and across alpine meadows dusted with the first hints of autumn color. We saw doll sheep perched impossibly on distant cliffs and a grizzly bear turning over rocks in a stream far enough away to be picturesque rather than threatening. The raw beauty of the place was intoxicating. We made camp that evening in a protected hollow. Elise collected firewood while I filtered water and set up the tent. As dusk deepened, we sat beside our small fire, eating freeze-dried stroganoff that tasted better than any restaurant meal after a day of hiking. "I was thinking," Elise said, staring into the flames. "Tomorrow, we could leave the main valley and head up toward Witchman Tower. There's an unmarked route I know from my research days." "Is it on our map?" I asked, pulling out the topographic map we'd been using. "Not exactly," she admitted, "but I know the way. There's this amazing hanging valley where we could camp. The view is unbelievable, and barely anyone ever goes there." I hesitated. Going off our planned route seemed unwise in such remote territory, but Elise looked more animated than I'd seen her in months, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Okay," I relented, "if you're sure you remember the way." "I do," she said, smiling. "I could never forget it." Later, as we lay in our tent listening to the wind pick up outside, Elise turned to me. "Do you ever feel like there are places in the world that call to you? Like they know your name?" "I guess," I said, thinking of a beach in Oregon where I'd vacationed as a child. "Some places do stick with you." "No, I mean really call to you. Like they're alive somehow, and they've noticed you, and they want you to come back." The hairs on my arms stood up. "That's kinda creepy, Elle." She was quiet for so long that I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, so softly I almost missed it, she whispered, "It's been calling me for years." The next morning dawned gray and misty. Low clouds clung to the peaks, and a light drizzle made the rocks slick as we packed up camp. I suggested waiting for better weather, but Elise was strangely insistent that we continue. "The forecast said it would clear by afternoon," she said, though I had no idea how she could know this when we had no way to check weather reports. "And I don't want to lose a day." So we hiked, leaving the faint trail behind and following Elise's memory up steep scree slopes and around massive boulders. The vegetation grew sparser as we climbed, giving way to a lunar landscape of rock and mist. I felt a growing unease as we ascended into cloud, reducing visibility to just a few yards ahead. Elise moved with unwavering certainty, never hesitating at junctions or checking her compass. "How much farther?" I called after several hours. My legs were burning from the climb and my pack seemed to grow heavier with each step. "Not far," she called back without turning. "We're close now. Can't you feel it?" I couldn't feel anything except exhaustion and a creeping sense that we were making a mistake. The mist had thickened, and occasional glimpses through the cloud revealed sheer drop-offs to either side of the narrow ridge we were traversing. One misstep would be fatal. Just as I was about to insist we turn back, the clouds parted. We'd reached a natural saddle between two peaks, and before us lay a small green valley suspended between mountains. A crystal-clear tarn reflected the rocky spires that surrounded it. The sudden beauty of it after hours in the disorienting mist was breathtaking. "See?" Elise said, turning to me with a triumphant smile. "Isn't it perfect?" It was perfect, unsettlingly so, like a painting rather than a real place. The valley seemed to exist in its own microclimate, the air still and unusually warm compared to the wind-whipped ridge we'd just crossed. We made our way down to the shore of the tarn and set up camp on a flat, grassy area that looked almost manicured. While I worked on the tent, Elise wandered the shoreline, stooping occasionally to examine something. "Look," she said when I joined her. In her palm lay several small objects: polished stones, a tooth from some large predator, and a tarnished silver ring. "People have been leaving offerings here for centuries." "Offerings to what?" I asked, taking the ring to examine it. It was heavy and crude, inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize. Elise shrugged. The place itself, I suppose. The Nunamute believe these high valleys are thin places where the spirit world touches ours. I handed the ring back. You shouldn't take things people left deliberately. I'm not taking them, she said, returning the objects to the exact spots where she'd found them. Just saying hello. That night, the clouds cleared completely, revealing a spectacular light show. The aurora borealis rippled across the sky in sheets of green and pink, reflecting in the still surface of the tarn until it seemed like we were floating in space, surrounded by light. It's responding to us being here, Elise said, her face bathed in the eerie glow. It's responding to solar flares, I corrected gently. She gave me a look that made me feel childish. There are things science still doesn't understand, Dan. Things I've been studying that don't fit neatly into academic papers. Like what? Like how certain places develop. Consciousness, for lack of a better word. How they can form connections with people. I laughed uneasily. You sound like you're describing a relationship with a mountain. Maybe I am. She wasn't laughing. I told you this place has been calling me. When I did my fieldwork here, something happened. Something changed in me. A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air ran through me. What are you talking about, Elle? But she just shook her head. Never mind. Let's enjoy the show. We watched the lights in silence after that. But the easy camaraderie of our relationship had been replaced by something tense and unfamiliar. When we finally retreated to our tent, Elise fell asleep immediately, but I lay awake for hours, listening to the wind pick up and wondering what had really happened during her previous visit to this place. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke with a start to the sound of voices. At first, I thought I was dreaming, hushed whispers that seemed to come from just outside our tent. I strained to make out words, but the language wasn't one I recognized. It was fluid and ancient-sounding, full of strange consonants that no human throat should be able to produce. Elise's sleeping bag was empty again. Heart-pounding, I unzipped the tent and looked out. The night was clear and cold, stars wheeling overhead, but the aurora was gone. Elise stood at the edge of the tarn, fully clothed this time, her back to me. She appeared to be in conversation with someone. I couldn't see anyone else, but I could still hear those whispers, now seeming to come from the surface of the water itself. As I watched, frozen in confusion and mounting fear, Elise nodded as if in agreement and began wading into the tarn. "Elise!" I called, finally breaking free of my paralysis. "Stop!" She turned, and in the moonlight her face was transformed, ancient and knowing, her eyes reflecting the starlight like an animal's. "Go back to sleep, Daniel," she said, her voice layered with other voices. "This doesn't concern you." "What the hell are you talking about? Get out of the water." I moved toward her, but something stopped me. A wall of pure cold that hit me like a physical barrier. Elise smiled, a terrible, tender expression. "I told you this place was calling me. It's time for me to answer." "You're not making sense," I pleaded. "You're sleepwalking again. Please, Elle, come back to the tent. We can talk about this in the morning." "I'm more awake than I've ever been," she said. The water was up to her waist now, her hands trailing through it like it was warm bath water instead of near-freezing meltwater. "They've been waiting for me, for someone like me. Do you know how rare it is to find someone who can hear them?" "Who?" I demanded, pushing against the invisible barrier of cold. It was like trying to walk into a freezer. "Who's been waiting?" "The old ones," she said simply. "The ones who were here long before humans. The ones who make their home in the deep places of the earth." As she spoke, the surface of the tarn began to change. What had been mirror-still water now moved in strange patterns, swirling counter to the light breeze, and beneath the surface something glowed with a pale blue light. "This isn't happening," I said, more to myself than to Elise. "You need help. We need to get you back to town, to a doctor." She laughed, and it was her laugh, but also not. Too deep, too knowing for the woman I loved. Poor Daniel. Always so rational. So limited in your understanding of what's possible. She was chest deep now, the weird blue glow illuminating her from below. I wanted you to see. That's why I brought you here, so you'd understand when I didn't come back. Don't come back? Elise, stop this. You're scaring me, I was shouting now, my voice echoing off the surrounding peaks. It's a gift, Daniel, to be chosen. I've been preparing for years, ever since I first came here and heard them, learning their language, understanding what they need from me. What do they need? I asked, desperate to keep her talking, to somehow break through whatever delusion had taken hold of her. A vessel, she said simply, a bridge between their world and yours. Before I could respond, the surface of the tarn erupted. What rose from the depths was impossible. A writhing column of what looked like liquid glass in moonlight, shot through with tendrils of that same blue luminescence. It towered over Elise, 20 feet or more, constantly shifting form like a wave frozen at the moment of breaking. And it had eyes, dozens of them at various heights, opening and closing independently. Ancient eyes, filled with an intelligence so alien it made my mind recoil. "Elise!" I screamed, fighting against the cold barrier with all my strength. "Run!" But she didn't run. She raised her arms to the thing as if in embrace, her expression one of rapture. "I'm ready," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the water. The column bent toward her, flowing around her body like mercury. Where it touched her, her skin began to glow with the same blue light. She gasped, her back arching, but not in pain, in something that looked disturbingly like ecstasy. Then they spoke, Elise and the thing, in that same fluid, impossible language I'd heard earlier. Their voices twisted together until I couldn't tell which sounds came from the woman I loved and which from the abomination embracing her. With a final surge, the entity enveloped her completely. For one terrible moment, I could see her suspended within it, her eyes wide open and glowing, her mouth forming words I couldn't hear. Then the entire column, Elise and all, plunged back into the tarn with a sound like a thunderclap. The surface of the water settled back to perfect stillness. The cold barrier vanished. I found myself running, splashing into the water, diving for where I'd last seen her. The tarn was deeper than it appeared. I dove until my lungs burned, squinting through the dark water, finding nothing. Again and again I surfaced for air, then dove back down, searching frantically, until hypothermia began to set in and I could barely move my limbs. Finally, half drowned and delirious with cold, I dragged myself back to shore. Dawn was breaking over the eastern peaks, painting the valley in rose-gold light that mocked my despair. I collapsed on the shoreline, shaking uncontrollably, trying to process what I'd seen. It wasn't possible. People don't get absorbed by luminous water creatures. They don't speak in languages never meant for human tongues. They don't willingly walk into alpine lakes in the middle of the night. Except Elise had. When I could move again, I searched the entire shoreline, calling her name until my voice gave out. I even broke camp and hiked the ridge above the tarn, thinking perhaps she'd somehow climbed out at another point. Nothing. Rational explanations suggested themselves. She'd hit her head and drowned while sleepwalking. She'd had some kind of psychotic break and was wandering the mountains. I'd hallucinated the whole thing due to altitude sickness or hypothermia. None of them fit what I'd seen. As the day wore on, my denial gave way to a numb sort of acceptance. Whatever had happened, Elise was gone. I was alone in one of the most remote wilderness areas in North America, off our planned route, with no way to call for help. I had to get back to the pickup point, had to tell someone what had happened even if they wouldn't believe me. I packed up our gear mechanically, leaving Elise's personal items in her pack, unable to bring myself to go through them. Just as I was about to start the trek back, movement at the tarn's edge caught my eye. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a fox or marten, but as it emerged fully from the water, I recognized the familiar shape of Elise's body. She was naked, her skin pale and perfect, without any sign of the hours spent in freezing water. Her movements were fluid, almost boneless as she rose to her full height. "Elise!" I dropped the pack and ran to her. "Oh my God, you're alive. What happened? Are you hurt?" She turned to me, and my relief curdled into fresh horror. It was Elise's face, Elise's body, but the eyes that regarded me were not hers. They were ancient and multifaceted, shifting in color from blue to green to silver as I watched. Her skin had a translucent quality, and beneath it something moved, currents of blue light tracing patterns beneath the surface. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice a dissonant blend of Elise's familiar tones and something else, a liquid, burbling undertone. "I hope you weren't planning to leave so soon." I stumbled backward. "You're not Elise." "I am, and I am not," she said, taking a step toward me. Her movements were wrong, too smooth, as if her joints worked differently now. "Elise is here, with me. She welcomed me. We are together now." "What are you?" I whispered. "I am older than the mountains that house this valley," it said. "I am what waits in the deep places and the dark waters. I am the keeper of the way between worlds." "The old ones," I said, remembering what Elise had called them. Not Elise smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "That is one name for us. We have been called many things by your kind over the centuries." "Give her back," I demanded, though I knew it was useless. "I cannot. Our union is complete. She knew what she was offering when she came to me." Not Elise cocked her head, studying me with those impossible eyes. "She loved you, you know. But she loved the vastness more, the knowledge we offered, the chance to be more than just a brief flicker of consciousness in a dying animal." Anger cut through my fear. "So you what? Promised her immortality? Some cosmic knowledge? And that was worth abandoning her entire life? The people who loved her?" "Yes," Not Elise said simply. "And now that you're here, I can see why she hesitated for so long. There is something in you too, a capacity for understanding that is rare among your kind." A chill ran through me as I realized what it was suggesting. "I'm not interested in being a vessel or whatever you did to her. No, don't you want to understand what she experienced? Don't you want to know what exists beyond the veil of your limited perception?" Not Elise moved closer, her movements more fluid than any human's could be. "We could be together, Daniel. All three of us, joined in knowledge beyond anything you've imagined." For one terrible moment, I felt the pull of its offer. What if there was some truth to what it was saying? What if Elise really had found something transcendent? And if I refused, I would lose her forever. Then I saw the gleam in those shifting eyes, hungry, alien, and ultimately indifferent to human concerns like love or grief. Whatever this thing was, it had taken Elise from me as surely as if it had killed her. "Go to hell," I said, backing away. Not Elise's face contorted in a parody of disappointment. "Such limited imagination." "Very well, I won't force you. That's not how we operate." She gestured toward the trail. "You're free to go. Tell your little story to whoever will listen. It won't matter." I didn't trust this sudden acquiescence, but I had no choice. I hoisted my pack, giving Not Elise a wide berth, and began making my way back toward the saddle we'd crossed the day before. "She'll be watching for you." "Daniel," Not Elise called after me, "in the reflection of every still pool, in the depths of your dreams. Part of her will always be hoping you'll change your mind." I didn't look back, just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, fighting the urge to run. The mist had returned, shrouding the peaks and making the treacherous route even more dangerous. Several times I nearly lost my footing on the steep scree. After what seemed like hours, I reached the saddle and paused to catch my breath. The valley behind me was completely obscured by cloud now. I allowed myself a moment of hope. Perhaps I'd made it. Perhaps the thing that wore Elise's face had been bound to that uncanny valley. Then I heard it. The sound of water running where no water should be. I turned slowly. Just a few feet away, a small spring had appeared where moments before there had been only dry rock. The water bubbled up black as ink, spreading across the ground unnaturally fast, flowing uphill in defiance of gravity. And from the growing pool rose not Elise, this time only her head and shoulders visible, as if the shallow puddle somehow connected to the depths of the tarn nearly a mile away. "I've reconsidered, Daniel," she said, her voice even less human now. "You know too much. You've seen too much. We can't have you spreading stories." I ran. The next hours were a nightmare of fog and pursuit. I abandoned any attempt to follow our route, just moving downhill as fast as I could, hoping to reach the main valley. The mist played tricks with sound and sight. Sometimes I thought I heard Elise calling my name in her normal voice, begging for help. Other times I glimpsed her watching from behind rocks or trees, her eyes glowing that unearthly blue. Twice I saw water flowing uphill toward me. Once I found my path blocked by a standing pool that hadn't been there moments before, its surface rippling though there was no wind. By nightfall, I was hopelessly lost, my water purifier broken in a fall, my GPS showing impossible coordinates that kept shifting. I made a cold camp behind a boulder, too afraid to risk a fire that might give away my position. Sleep was impossible. Every sound in the darkness had me reaching for my knife. Dawn brought little relief. The mist was thicker than ever, and I was showing signs of dehydration and exposure. My only hope was to keep moving downhill, to eventually reach the river where we'd been dropped off. Midway through that second day of flight, I heard voices, human voices, speaking English. Hope surged through me as I changed direction toward the sound. Breaking through a stand of stunted spruce, I found myself facing two hikers, a man and woman in their 50s, well-equipped and clearly experienced. "Oh, thank God," I gasped, stumbling toward them. "I need help. My girlfriend. There was an accident." The couple exchanged glances. "We're Tom and Sarah Jenkins," the man said cautiously. "Are you injured?" "No, but I'm lost. I need to get back to the pickup point. To report—" I stopped, realizing how insane my story would sound. There was an accident at a mountain lake. My girlfriend drowned. Sarah's face softened with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. Where exactly did this happen?" I described the route as best I could, though I was no longer certain of anything. The couple listened attentively. "We know this area well," Tom said. "We can help you get back to the river for your pickup. When is it scheduled?" 3 days from now, I said, relief washing over me. "Well, we're headed that way ourselves," Sarah said. "You're welcome to travel with us." They shared their water and some trail mix. Then we set off together. The mist seemed to thin as we hiked, and for the first time since Elise's transformation, I felt a glimmer of hope. These experienced hikers knew the way out. I would make it back to civilization. I would report what had happened, even if no one believed me. We made camp that evening in a protected hollow very similar to where Elise and I had spent our second night. As darkness fell, Tom built a small fire while Sarah prepared a meal of rehydrated chili that smelled like the most delicious thing I'd ever encountered. "So, tell us more about your girlfriend," Tom said as we ate. "You said she drowned?" I hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. She was sleepwalking, walked into an alpine lake in the middle of the night. By the time I realized she was gone, it was too late. "How awful," Sarah said, her voice full of compassion. "You must be devastated." "I am," I admitted. "We'd been together for 3 years. I thought we would get married someday." "Did she often sleepwalk?" Tom asked. "No, never. Well, once on this trip, the night before, but she'd been under a lot of stress, just finished her doctorate." "What was she studying?" Sarah asked. "Environmental science, but her dissertation was on—" I frowned, trying to remember the exact title. Something about indigenous belief systems and geographical anomalies. To be honest, I never fully understood it. Tom and Sarah exchanged another of those looks. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," Sarah said quickly. "It's just, there are stories about some of these high lakes. Old stories." A coldness that had nothing to do with the mountain air seeped into my bones. "What kind of stories?" Tom poked at the fire. "The kind you don't usually share with outsiders, but given what you've been through, the Nunamiut believe certain bodies of water are doorways, places where their shamans could communicate with spirits from the other side." "Doorways," I repeated numbly. Sarah nodded. "Sometimes, according to the stories, these spirits would take a human form to walk among people. They called them the water people." My spoon clattered against my bowl. Did these water people have blue light under their skin? Eyes that changed color? The couple stared at me. "How did you know that?" Tom asked softly. I set my bowl aside, suddenly nauseated. "Because I saw her, after she drowned, but it wasn't her anymore." Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Sarah leaned forward. "You said you saw her. After. What exactly did you see, Daniel?" I told them everything. The uncanny valley, the thing that rose from the tarn, Elise's transformation, the pursuit afterward. Once I started talking, I couldn't stop, the words pouring out of me in a desperate flood. When I finished, the couple sat in silence, their expressions unreadable in the flickering firelight. "You think I'm crazy," I said flatly. "No," Tom said, "we don't." "You don't understand," Sarah added. "We came looking for you, both of you." My blood turned to ice. "What?" "Your pilot, Ray. He contacted the Nunamute elders after he dropped you off," Tom explained. "He had a bad feeling about your girlfriend. Said she didn't seem right. The elders sent us to find you before you reached the high places." "We're too late for your Elise," Sarah said, her voice heavy with regret. "But we might still save you." "Save me from what?" I demanded, though I already knew the answer. "From her," Tom said simply. "They don't give up easily once they've chosen someone. And if what you saw is true, this one is particularly powerful. Most of them can't manipulate water far from their source." I looked between them, these strangers who seemed to accept the impossible as commonplace. "Who are you people? Really?" "Guardians, I suppose you could say," Sarah replied. "People who know the old stories and know they're not just stories. People who've sworn to protect others from what lives in the deep places." "My great-grandfather was taken by one of them," Tom added. "The stories say he still walks the high country on certain nights, trying to lure others to the water." I buried my face in my hands. "How do I know I can trust you? How do I know you're not like her? Part of this thing's tricks?" "You don't," Sarah said plainly. "But we're your only chance of getting out of here alive." I had no choice but to believe them. We extinguished the fire and moved camp to a new location, one without any water nearby. Not even a trickle. Tom produced small pouches of salt and laid them in a circle around our sleeping area. "Cold, iron, and salt," he explained. "Old protections, but effective." I doubted metal and seasoning would stop whatever had taken Elise, but I kept my skepticism to myself. These people at least believed they could help me. That night, I dreamed of Elise, not the thing she'd become, but the woman I'd loved. We were back in our apartment in Seattle, making dinner together, laughing about something trivial. Everything was normal except for her eyes, which kept shifting color like mood rings. "I miss you," Dream Elise said, touching my face tenderly. "It's not too late, you know. You could still join us." "There is no us," I said, pulling away from her touch. "You're gone, Elle. Whatever that thing is, it's not you." "But it is," she insisted. "I'm still here, Daniel. I'm just more now. I understand things I never could before, and I'm not alone anymore." Her expression turned pleading. Don't you see how lonely I was before? How empty? You had me, I said, my dream self crying now. Was that not enough? She smiled sadly. You're a momentary spark. Daniel, beautiful but fleeting. What I've become is eternal. I woke with tears on my face. The protective circle was intact, but at its edge, just beyond where the salt had been laid, was a perfect circle of water. It hadn't been there when we'd made camp. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding. Tom! Sarah! They were already awake, staring at the water with grim expressions. It found us faster than I expected, Tom muttered, rummaging through his pack to pull out a small leather pouch. Sarah stood at the edge of our protective circle, her breath visible in the pre-dawn chill. It's testing the boundaries, she said softly, seeing what it can cross. As we watched, the circle of water began to ripple, though there was no wind. Slowly, it expanded outward, stopping just short of our salt barrier. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We move, Tom said decisively. Now, while it's still weak from extending this far from its source. We packed with frantic efficiency, keeping our eyes on the expanding pool. By the time the sun crested the mountain ridge, we were already a mile away, descending rapidly toward the main valley. The day passed in a blur of constant movement. Tom and Sarah set a punishing pace, pausing only for brief water and food breaks. They seemed to have an uncanny sense of the landscape, finding hidden game trails and shortcuts I would never have noticed on my own. By late afternoon, we'd reached a swift-flowing river, one of the tributaries that would eventually lead us back to our pickup point. The sight of moving water made me nervous, but Tom shook his head at my hesitation. Running water is generally safe, he explained. They prefer still pools where they can gather their strength. That's why we're not camping near the river tonight. Too easy for it to create an eddy or backwater. We made camp on a rocky outcrop with no water source nearby. Again, Tom laid his salt circle and added small iron nails at cardinal points around our sleeping area. The sky clouded over as darkness fell, obscuring the stars and making the night seem even more oppressive. Tomorrow we should reach Hunter's Pass, Sarah said as we ate a cold dinner. There's a ranger outpost there. Not permanently manned, but it has a radio. We can call for an emergency pickup. Will that stop her? I asked. Getting back to civilization? Tom and Sarah exchanged looks again. Maybe, Tom said carefully. These entities are tied to their places of power. The further you get from the source, the weaker their influence. But this one seems unusually strong. And it has a perfect vessel? Sarah added. Your girlfriend gave herself willingly. That creates a powerful bond. I stared into the darkness beyond our circle. So, even if I make it back, you'll need to be vigilant, Tom confirmed, especially around water, pools, lakes, even bathtubs. For how long, I can't say. Maybe months, maybe years. Or maybe forever, Sarah said softly. The thought of spending the rest of my life afraid of water was almost too much to bear. There has to be a way to stop it, to free her. The old stories say there are ways, Tom admitted, but they require great sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Sarah gave Tom a warning look. It doesn't matter. The price is too high, and the chances of success too slim. I want to know, I insisted. Tom sighed heavily. According to legend, these entities can be forced to release their hold on a human vessel if a voluntary exchange is made, someone offering themselves in place of the taken. Or, Sarah added reluctantly, if the vessel is destroyed while the entity is inside it. The implication hung in the air between us. Kill Elise, or whatever was wearing her form, and maybe the thing inside her would be banished. Neither option is viable, Sarah said firmly. The first would just create another victim, and the second, we don't even know if it would work, or if you could bring yourself to do it. She was right. Even knowing what Elise had become, I couldn't imagine harming her. and offering myself in her place would just perpetuate the cycle. "Get some sleep," Tom suggested gently. "We have a long day ahead tomorrow." But sleep, when it came, brought only more dreams of Elise. This time, we were swimming in Circle Lake, the water unnaturally warm around us. Fish with human eyes darted beneath the surface, watching us. "They're so lonely," Dream Elise said, floating on her back beside me. "That's why they call to us. Centuries of isolation in the deep places." "That doesn't give them the right to take people," I argued. She turned to me, water beating on her face like diamonds. "Is it taking if we go willingly? Is it wrong to want more than the brief, mundane existence humans are allowed?" I woke before dawn, Tom's hand on my shoulder. "We need to move," he whispered urgently. "Now." I struggled to orient myself. "What's wrong?" "Listen." I held my breath. In the distance came the sound of someone singing, a hauntingly beautiful melody in that same fluid, impossible language I'd heard at the tarn. Elise's voice, but not quite. "She's coming," Sarah hissed, already rolling up her sleeping bag. "We have maybe an hour's head start." We broke camp in minutes, not bothering with breakfast, and set off down the steep slope toward Hunter's Pass. The sky was beginning to lighten, but heavy clouds promised rain later, a prospect that filled me with dread. The terrain grew more challenging as we descended. Twice we had to backtrack when our path ended at sheer drop-offs. The singing had stopped, but occasionally I caught glimpses of movement in the trees below us, a flash of pale skin, a flutter of dark hair. "She's hurting us," Tom muttered after our third detour, "trying to drive us toward water." "But we're still headed in the right direction?" I asked. "More or less, but we're losing time." By midday, the first raindrops began to fall. Within minutes it had become a downpour, turning the trail into a slippery mess of mud and loose rocks. We pressed on, using trekking poles to keep our balance on the treacherous slope. The rain worked against us in more ways than one. Not only did it make travel more difficult, but it created countless small rivulets and puddles, potential points of ingress for our pursuer. Tom and Sarah grew increasingly tense, checking over their shoulders constantly. "There!" Sarah suddenly pointed up the slope behind us. Through the curtain of rain, I saw her. Elise, or the thing that had once been Elise. She stood motionless, her pale form stark against the dark trees, water streaming over her body as if she were part of the rainfall itself. Even from this distance I could see the blue glow beneath her skin, pulsing in time with the storm. "Run!" Tom shouted, grabbing my arm. We abandoned any pretense of careful descent, half running, half sliding down the muddy slope. Branches whipped at our faces, roots tried to snare our feet, but terror drove us onward. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see gaining on us. The roar of the water grew louder ahead, not the gentle sound of the river we'd passed earlier, but the thunderous crash of a waterfall swollen with rain. My heart sank as we broke through the tree line and saw what lay before us. A raging torrent blocked our path, at least 30 feet across and moving with lethal force. Debris, whole trees, boulders, tumbled in the churning water. There was no way across. "This wasn't here before," Sarah said, her face pale with fear and exhaustion. "This isn't a natural watercourse." "She's creating it," Tom said grimly, "using the rain, redirecting every stream and rivulet in these mountains to cut us off." I turned to scan the slope behind us. No sign of Elise, but that didn't mean she wasn't close. "What do we do?" I asked, having to shout over the roar of the water. Tom's eyes darted around, assessing our options. "We follow the edge downstream. There has to be a narrower point, or a fallen tree we can use to cross." "And if there isn't?" He didn't answer, just started moving along the bank. Sarah and I followed, keeping well back from the edge where the ground had been undermined by the rushing water. The rain continued to pour down, so heavy now that visibility was reduced to just a few yards. The day had grown prematurely dark, as if night were falling hours too early. I stumbled after Tom and Sarah, my legs leaden with exhaustion, my mind numb with fear. After what seemed like miles, the riverbank curved sharply, and the thundering grew even louder. We found ourselves at the top of a steep ravine. Below, the water plunged into a deep, mist-shrouded pool before continuing its journey down the mountain. There, Sarah pointed to a massive fallen pine that spanned the chasm about 50 yards downstream. That's our crossing. We picked our way carefully along the cliff edge. The tree looked precarious. Its root ball partially torn from the ground on our side, its crown disappeared into the mist on the far bank. But it was our only option. Tom tested it first, stepping carefully onto the trunk. "It's solid enough," he called back, "but slippery. One at a time and go slow." Sarah went next, her movements deliberate and focused. I watched anxiously as she made her way across, the tree swaying slightly with each step. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Heights had never bothered me before, but the combination of the sheer drop, the slick bark, and the knowledge of what pursued us made my knees weak. "Go," Tom urged. "We don't have much time." I took a deep breath and stepped onto the tree trunk. The bark was slimy with rain and moss, requiring my complete concentration to maintain balance. I inched forward, keeping my eyes fixed on the far bank where Sarah waited. Halfway across, the singing started again, closer now, rising over the roar of the waterfall. I froze, then made the mistake of looking back. She stood at the edge of the ravine, her face serene despite the torrential rain, her skin glowing with that eerie blue light that seemed to intensify in the gloom. Tom was between us, his expression tight with fear. "Daniel," not Elise called, her voice somehow cutting through the noise of the storm. "Stop running from me, please." "Keep moving," Sarah shouted from the far bank. I tore my gaze away from Not Elise and forced myself to continue across the log. Behind me, I heard Tom call out, his voice tight with fear. "It's too late for me. Get him to the ranger station." I glanced back again and saw Tom backing away from the edge of the ravine, putting himself between Not Elise and the log I was crossing. He pulled something from his pocket, a vial of some dark liquid, and flung it at her. Not Elise screamed, the sound inhuman and piercing. Where the liquid had splattered her skin, it sizzled and steamed despite the rain. For a moment, the blue glow beneath her skin flickered. "Iron and salt," Tom shouted to us. "The old ways still hurt them." Not Elise's face contorted with rage. She lunged forward with impossible speed, catching Tom before he could retreat further. Her hands, no longer quite human, wrapped around his throat. "Go," he managed to choke out. "I'll hold her as long as I can." I was almost to the far bank now. Sarah reached out, grabbing my arm to help pull me off the log. "We have to run," she said, her voice breaking. "There's nothing we can do for him now." The last thing I saw before the mist obscured my view was Tom struggling in Not Elise's grasp, his feet leaving the ground as she lifted him effortlessly. Then came a splash that seemed to echo through the ravine. Sarah pulled me away from the edge, her grip painfully tight. "Run," she said again, her face streaked with tears and rain. "Run, and don't look back." We ran. Through forest and over scree fields, across alpine meadows and along game trails so faint I would never have found them on my own. The rain eventually stopped, but we didn't. Sarah pushed us onward with single-minded determination, barely speaking except to give terse directions. By nightfall, we reached Hunter's Pass, a natural saddle between two mountains, marked by a small wooden building that had to be the ranger outpost. It looked abandoned, windows dark, but when Sarah tried the door, it swung open. Inside was basic but serviceable. A desk with a radio, emergency supplies, a wood stove, and 2 narrow cots. Sarah immediately went to the radio while I collapsed onto one of the cots, my legs finally giving out after the day's ordeal. "Bettles Ranger Station, this is Sarah Jenkins at Hunter's Pass Outpost. Emergency evacuation requested. Over." She repeated the call several times, adjusting frequencies between attempts. Finally, a crackly voice responded, "Hunters pass. This is Bettles. Nature of emergency." Over. Sarah glanced at me. One hiker missing, presumed drowned. 2 survivors in need of evacuation. My husband is also missing. Over. There was a pause, then, weather conditions currently preclude helicopter evacuation. Forecast clearing by 0800 tomorrow. Can you maintain position until then? Over. Affirmative, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite everything. We'll signal when weather clears. Over and out. She set the radio down and sank into the desk chair, suddenly looking every one of her years and more. They'll come in the morning, she said dully, if the weather clears. And if she finds us before then? I asked.
Voicing the fear we both share, Sarah pulled closer and removed a bag from it. She brought vials similar. One had not Elise, along with packets of salt and iron nails. We defend ourselves as best we can, she said, her voice hard. She pays for what she did to Tom. We worked in silence.
Laying salt across the threshold and windowsills, placing iron nails at corners and junctions. When we had done all we could, Sarah lit the wood stove while I looked through the outpost supplies for anything edible. You really believe all of this will keep her out? I asked as we ate a meager dinner of canned beans and stale crackers. Salt and iron against whatever she is. It's worked for generations, Sarah said. These entities have rules they must follow, limitations to their power. The old ways of protection were discovered through centuries of trial and error. She paused, staring into the flames visible through the wood stove's grate. It helped my family keep the water people at bay after they took my husband's great-grandfather. I processed this new information. So you and Tom weren't husband and wife, no. Cousins by marriage, both from families that have appointed themselves guardians against these things. She gave me a tired smile. The Nunamute elders contacted us when your pilot raised concerns. We've worked with them before. I'm sorry about Tom, I said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He knew the risks. We both did. But it never gets easier, losing someone to them. We fell silent after that, each lost in our own grief. Despite my exhaustion, I fought sleep, afraid of what dreams might come. But eventually, my body betrayed me, and I drifted off to the sound of rain resuming its patter on the outpost's metal roof. I dreamed I was back in the ravine, watching Tom's last moments from a different angle. This time, I could see his face clearly as Nautilus lifted him off the ground. He wasn't afraid. His expression was one of grim determination. As she drew him closer, he pulled something else from his pocket. A small pistol. You can take me, Dream Tom said, pressing the gun against Nautilus's side. But I'm taking this vessel with me. The gunshot jolted me awake. I sat up on the cot, disoriented, my heart racing. Across the small room, Sarah was already on her feet, a small flashlight in one hand, one of her vials in the other. What was that? I whispered. I don't know, she murmured. I thought I heard. The sound came again, not a gunshot as my dream had suggested, but a sharp knocking at the door. 3 precise raps, followed by silence. Sarah and I stared at each other in the dim light. The wood stove had burned down to embers, and the outpost was cold. Through the window, I could see it was still dark outside, the rain still falling steadily. Don't answer it, I said quietly. It's her. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Hello, called a voice from outside, a man's voice, elderly and tremulous. Is anyone there? Please, I need help. I'm lost. Sarah's grip tightened on her vial. It's not real, she whispered. It's mimicking. My wife is hurt, the voice continued, cracking with desperation. Please, we've been out in the rain for hours. We saw your light. Despite knowing it was a trick, I found myself wanting to respond, to open the door. The performance was convincing. exactly what you would expect from someone genuinely in distress. Sarah must have seen the hesitation in my face. "They're ancient hunters," she reminded me. "They've had millennia to perfect their lures." The voice changed, becoming younger, more familiar. "Daniel? Are you in there? It's me, Elise, the real me. Please, I escaped, but I don't know for how long. Please let me in." My heart twisted at the sound of her voice. Not the liquid, multi-toned version of our pursuer, but Elise as I remembered her. The logical part of my brain knew it couldn't be her, that the real Elise was gone, but emotion isn't logical. "Daniel, I'm so cold," the voice pleaded. "Something terrible happened at the lake. I can't explain it, but I got away. Please, help me." I took an involuntary step toward the door. Sarah blocked my path. "It's not her," she said firmly. "She's gone, Daniel. Accept that." "But what if some part of her is still in there?" I argued. "What if she really did escape somehow?" "That's what it wants you to think," Sarah said. "That's how they get you to invite them in." The knocking became a pounding, the wood of the door flexing under the assault. "Daniel!" the voice screamed, dropping any pretense of humanity. "Let me in." The wind outside rose to a howl, ratting the windows. Rain lashed against the glass with unnatural force. The temperature in the room plummeted until our breath clouded the air. "The protections are holding," Sarah said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "It can't cross the salt unless invited." As if in answer to her assertion, water began to seep under the door. Not the thin trickle you might expect during a heavy rain, but a deliberate flow that pooled on the wooden floor, stopping precisely at the line of salt we'd laid. Then, impossibly, the puddle began to rise, forming itself into a column that gradually took on a human shape. Within seconds, not Elise stood before us, her form liquid and semi-transparent, the blue light within her pulsing angrily. The salt line continued to hold her at bay, but she was inside the outpost now, separated from us by merely inches of protective minerals. "Clever," she said, her voice that discordant blend of Elise and something other. "Using the old ways. But there are always gaps in your defenses, always ways to test the boundaries." Behind me, Sarah was frantically rummaging through her bag. I kept my eyes on not Elise, trying not to show my terror. "What did you do to Tom?" I demanded. Not Elise smiled, the expression all wrong on her liquid face. "He joined us, of course, just as your Elise did, just as you both will eventually." "We'll never join you," I said, with more conviction than I felt. "Oh, but you will," she purred. "If not willingly, then in death. Water claims all in the end. Your bodies return to the earth, and what you call your souls, well, those are ours to collect." Sarah stepped up beside me, something clutched in her hand. "Not today," she said, and threw a handful of salt directly into Not Elise's face. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. Not Elise's features dissolved, her scream a gargling sound as her watery form began to lose cohesion. The blue light within her flickered wildly, and for just a moment I thought I saw something else inside her. A mass of eyes and tendrils that had nothing to do with human anatomy. "The radio," Sarah commanded, backing toward the desk. "Call for immediate evacuation. Now." I dove for the radio while Sarah continued to fling salt at the writhing column of water. Not Elise was retreating toward the door, but slowly reforming as she moved beyond the range of Sarah's assault. My hands shook as I keyed the microphone. "Bettles Ranger Station, this is Hunter's Pass Outpost. Emergency immediate evacuation required. I repeat, emergency evacuation." I didn't bother with proper radio protocol, just kept repeating the message with increasing desperation. A voice crackled through the static. "Hunter's Pass, this is Bettles. Weather still prevents air evac. What is the nature of your emergency?" I looked over at Sarah, who was now pressed against the wall, her supply of salt nearly exhausted. Not Elise had partially reformed, her features distorted but recognizable. rage twisting what had once been my girlfriend's beautiful face. "Life or death," I shouted into the radio. "Please, we need help now." "Stand by," the voice replied. Nautilus lunged forward again, testing the salt barrier. Where it had been disturbed by our movement, she was able to extend a liquid tendril into the room. "We can't wait for morning," Sarah gasped, her face pale with exhaustion. "We need to run, now." "Where?" I demanded. "She'll just follow us." Sarah's eyes darted around the room, landing on a map tacked to the wall. "There," she said, pointing to a spot about 2 miles from our location. "Frozen Lake. If we can get her there—" "Another lake? Are you insane? That's what she wants." "Trust me," Sarah said, grabbing her pack. "I have a plan, but we need to go now while she's weakened." Not having any better options, I slung on my own pack. Sarah threw her last handful of salt at Nautilus, creating another momentary disruption, and we bolted for the rear window. I smashed it with a chair, and we climbed through, ignoring the cuts from broken glass. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet, creating treacherous conditions. But it also meant water was freezing rather than flowing freely, a fact that might work in our favor. We ran blindly at first, simply trying to put distance between ourselves and the outpost. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, though the sun itself was hidden behind dense clouds. "This way," Sarah called, adjusting our course toward higher ground. Frozen Lake is on a plateau above the tree line. The climb was brutal after everything we'd been through. My muscles screamed in protest, and my lungs burned in the thin, cold air. But fear is a powerful motivator, and the knowledge of what followed drove us onward. Sarah stopped suddenly, grabbing my arm. "Listen." Through the wind came that now familiar singing, the alien, liquid language that had haunted the tarn where Elise had transformed. It was fainter than before, more distant, but still pursuing. "She's weakened," Sarah said. "The salt did more damage than I hoped. We might actually have a chance." We pressed on, cresting a ridge to find ourselves looking down into a shallow depression containing a perfectly circular lake. Unlike Circle Lake, where our journey had begun, this one was completely frozen over, its surface a flawless sheet of blue-white ice. "Frozen Lake," Sarah explained as we made our way down to the shore. "It never thaws, not even in summer. The Nunamute say it's because what lies beneath is so cold that not even the sun can warm it." "What lies beneath?" I asked, not sure I wanted the answer. "A guardian," she said simply. "Something old, something that hunts the hunters." We reached the lake's edge, the ice extending seamlessly from the rocky shore. Sarah immediately began unpacking items from her bag: salt, iron nails, and a small knife. "These entities are territorial," she explained, working quickly to arrange her materials in a pattern on the ice. "They don't just hunger for human vessels, they war with each other. Frozen Lake contains one of the oldest of their kind, one that has chosen to ally itself with humans against the others." "You're going to summon another one of these things?" I asked, incredulous. "How is that a solution?" "Not summon, awaken," she corrected. "It's already here, and it's our only hope." She looked up at me, her expression grave. "But there's a price." Before I could ask what price she meant, the singing grew suddenly louder. Not Elise appeared at the top of the ridge, her form more solid now, though still rippling strangely at the edges. She moved with that same unnatural fluidity, covering ground far too quickly for something with a human shape. Sarah worked faster, cutting her palm with the knife and letting her blood drip onto the pattern she'd created. "It needs a taste," she murmured, "to know we're serious." "Sarah," Nautilus called, her voice echoing across the frozen expanse. "I remember you now. Your family has interfered with us for generations." Her gaze shifted to me, and Daniel, still running, still denying what you could become. She began to descend toward us, her movements almost languid, confident in her inevitable victory. Sarah finished her pattern and stood, her bleeding hand extended over the ice. "Hear me, guardian of the frozen deep," she intoned. "We invoke the ancient pact. Blood for protection, flesh for vengeance." The ice beneath our feet shuddered. A low groan emanated from deep below, like massive sheets of ice grinding against each other. The sound rose in pitch until it became a keening wail that set my teeth on edge. Not Elise stopped her advance, uncertainty crossing her features for the first time. "What have you done?" she demanded. The ice at the center of the lake began to crack, spiderwebbing outward in a perfect circle. Blue-white light, colder and purer than the sickly glow of not Elise's form, shone through the fractures. "What happens now?" I asked Sarah, backing away from the spreading cracks. Her face was grim. "Now I fulfill my part of the bargain." Before I could stop her, she stepped forward onto the fractured ice and began walking toward the center of the lake. "Sarah, no!" I shouted, reaching for her. She looked back at me, her expression peaceful despite everything. "My family has served as guardians for generations, Daniel. This is what we do." She nodded toward the ridge where Not Elise stood frozen in apparent shock. "Get to higher ground. No matter what happens, don't come onto the ice. And when it's over, tell the elders that the Jenkins family has honored their oath." I wanted to argue, to pull her back, but something in her face stopped me. This was her choice, made with full knowledge of the consequences. All I could do was honor it. I retreated to the shore as Sarah continued toward the center of the lake, the ice groaning beneath her feet. Not Elise seemed torn between fleeing and pursuing us, her form fluctuating wildly as she sensed the rising power beneath the ice. When Sarah reached the center, where the cracks converged, she stopped and spread her arms wide. "I offer myself as vessel," she called out, her voice ringing with ceremonial weight. "Guardian of the frozen deep, I invite you forth to hunt your kin." The ice shattered. Sarah plunged into the dark water below, not even a cry escaping her lips. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lake began to glow with that same cold, blue-white light, growing in intensity until it was painful to look at directly. From the depths rose not water, but ice. A crystalline column that twisted and shaped itself into a vaguely human form twice the height of a normal person. Where Not Elise was fluid and organic in her otherworldliness, this entity was angular and geometric, facets catching the light like a massive diamond. Within its translucent form, I could just make out Sarah's suspended body, her expression serene as if in deep sleep. Not Elise made a sound I can only describe as a hiss of recognition. "Elder," she said, her voice small with something approaching fear. "This is not your territory." The ice entity turned its featureless face toward her. When it spoke, the sound was like an avalanche compressed into words, a grinding, cracking voice that somehow carried meaning. "All water is my territory." "Child," it said, "especially when it freezes." Not Elise backed away, starting to climb back up the ridge. "The vessel came to me willingly," she argued. "I claimed her by the old rights." "And now I claim you by older rights," the ice entity replied, extending a crystalline arm. "The right of strength, the right of age, the right of vengeance sought and paid for in blood." The air temperature plummeted. My breath froze in front of my face and frost formed instantly on every surface. "Not!" Elise shrieked as her liquid form began to crystallize, ice forming along her edges, creeping inward toward her core. "No!" she cried, her voice distorting as her throat froze. "I am water! I am eternal! I am—" Her words cut off as the freezing process completed. Where Elise had stood was now a perfect ice sculpture, every detail preserved. The terror on her face, one hand extended in a futile attempt to ward off her fate, the last flickers of blue light trapped within the frozen form. The ice entity turned to me, its faceted head tilting in what might have been curiosity. "You were vessel bonded to the captured one," it stated rather than asked. I nodded, unable to form words in the face of this ancient being. She is contained now, it continued. Frozen in a prison she cannot escape. Not truly destroyed, our kind cannot be, but bound and powerless. It gestured toward the ice statue that had been not Elise. You may shatter her if you wish. It would give you closure, though it changes nothing in the long term. I looked at the frozen form of what had once been the woman I loved. Despite everything that had happened, despite knowing that Elise was long gone, I couldn't bring myself to destroy her image. No, I said finally, let her remain as a warning to others. The entity seemed to approve. Wise. Monuments serve a purpose. It began to sink back into the lake, the ice reforming around it. The pact is fulfilled. The price is paid. The Jenkins bloodline has served with honor. Wait, I called. Sarah, is she? The entity paused. She serves now as I require. Her consciousness remains. Her sacrifice was willing and therefore powerful. Its voice softened slightly, as much as something like an avalanche can soften. She knew the cost. Her family always has. With those final words, it disappeared beneath the surface, the ice knitting seamlessly in its wake until Frozen Lake was once again an unbroken expanse of blue-white. I stood alone on the shore, the wind whipping around me, not knowing what to do next. The immediate danger had passed, but I was still miles from civilization, in treacherous mountain terrain with limited supplies. Then I heard it, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. The Rangers had decided to risk the weather after all. I fumbled in my pack for an emergency flare, lit it, and held it high above my head, the red glow stark against the gray morning sky. The helicopter spotted me within minutes, circling once before finding a landing spot on a relatively flat area nearby. 2 Rangers approached cautiously across the uneven ground, clearly surprised to find a lone hiker in such a remote location. "Sir," the lead ranger called, "are you from the Hunters Pass outpost? We received a distress call." I nodded, suddenly too exhausted to speak. "Where are the others?" he asked, looking around. The call mentioned multiple people. I gazed back at Frozen Lake, then at the ice statue on the ridge that had once been Elise. How could I possibly explain? "Gone," I said simply, my voice cracking. "They're gone." The search for Tom and Sarah Jenkins continued for 2 weeks. The Rangers found evidence of our camp at the outpost and signs of some kind of struggle, but no bodies. Elise was already listed as missing, presumed drowned, from my initial report. Eventually, all 3 were classified as missing persons, their files added to the distressingly large number of people who vanish in the Alaskan wilderness each year. I told a version of the truth during the inevitable interviews, that we'd been separated during a storm, that I'd been lucky to find the outpost and call for help. I left out everything about water entities and ancient pacts. Who would believe me?